Chapter 736. His words startled me. For what I could tell, the evil sacrificial spirit was invincible in this world. All this time, no matter what kind of situation he encountered, he had always dealt with it casually. Why was he so afraid of the 10-terminal formation? After a moment of silence, I recalled the fat man's explanation of the formation. I told the evil sacrificial spirit, "This formation is called the 10-terminal formation. It's made up of 99 palaces, great formations, and a hidden formation. The fat man and I used the 9 cauldrons to break the 99 palaces, great formations. The darkness in front of us is the last formation." The fat man was still unconscious, so he couldn't explain the formation in detail. I told the evil sacrificial spirit everything I had heard from the fat man, hoping to enlighten the evil sacrificial spirit. After listening to me, the evil sacrificial spirit shook his head. "This is indeed the 10-terminal formation, but the darkness in front of us isn't a hidden formation. It's a magic treasure." "A magic treasure?" I was surprised and asked, "What kind of magic treasure?" The evil sacrificial spirit shook his head again. "I don't know what kind of magic treasure it is. I set up the 10-terminal formation with my own hands, and the 81 bronze statues in the formation were transformed from the great monsters under my command. But what is sealed in the 9 palaces great formation is..." At this point, he paused for a moment and changed his words. "The seal isn't some kind of concealment array formation. After thousands of years, I don't know who came to this place and swapped the sealed item for a magic treasure, leaving it here." After saying that, he stretched out his hand and pressed forward. The vast expanse of darkness in front of him dissipated and was replaced by a long tunnel. Previously, Wiyue had brought me through a tunnel to enter the location of the 10-terminal formation. Later, the quicksand-like darkness engulfed this place, and it became like this. However, the tunnel in front of me was not the tunnel we had walked through before. This passageway was completely man-made, and the surrounding stone walls were engraved with complicated patterns. 2 oil lamps were set up at regular intervals, and each lamp was held above the head by a statue that was taller than a man. While I was carefully observing the tunnel, the evil sacrificial spirit walked in and asked me to follow him. After following him into the tunnel and walking for about 20 meters, the evil sacrificial spirit stopped in front of a screen of light. When I arrived here earlier, I encountered this light screen. As long as I touch it, a golden light will erupt from the light screen, and 18 bronze men will appear. These 18 copper figures possessed ferocious strengths, and I suffered a heavy injury as soon as we fought, so I could only retreat helplessly. In the end, I relied on a treasure within the tomb that possessed spatial energy to avoid this place and directly enter the cave. Heavily injured? Hearing those 2 words, my expression changed. I thought that he was just afraid of me. Who would have thought that I would be heavily injured in the first exchange? What kind of power was needed to do that? Amidst his bewilderment, the evil sacrificial spirit continued. After that, I pondered for a long time, but I had no clue. When I touched the light screen again and fight with the 18 bronze men, you can take the opportunity to observe and see if you could discover anything. I wasn't confident. How would I be able to recognize something that even you don't have a clue about? The evil sacrificial spirit shook his head. "I've been asleep for thousands of years, and the world has changed a lot during this time. You're from the later generations, so you should have more knowledge than me." What he said made sense, so I had to force myself to nod. "All right, that's the only way." Then, the evil sacrificial spirit lifted his foot and walked toward the light screen. When he got close, he didn't hesitate and directly placed his hand on the light screen. At first, there was nothing unusual, but when his right hand touched the light screen, the surrounding passageway started to shake, and then there was the sound of a bell that came from an unknown place. At first, it was extremely soft, but after a while, it became deafening like a huge bell. In a trance, he had the illusion of encountering a Buddhist temple in the wilderness, and he couldn't help but feel solemn. After the bell rang, the surroundings quietened down. Not long after, a golden light appeared at the end of the tunnel. Immediately after, the light screen also turned golden. It seemed as if a huge force was born within it, directly sending the evil, sacrificial spirit flying far away. Seeing that he was injured, I became anxious. Disregarding the danger, I circulated my true essence and flew forward, trying to catch the evil, sacrificial spirit's body. However, I didn't expect that the power of that golden light was incomparably strong. As soon as I touched the sacrificial spirit, my blood and chi surged, and I slid back a long distance before I stopped. Using the human-shaped lamppost on the wall to stabilize my body, I hurried to look at the evil, sacrificial spirit. Just now, I had only received a little bit of that attack, but it was already a heavy blow. The evil sacrificial spirit had directly received it, so I didn't know how he was doing. At this moment, the evil sacrificial spirit stood up and patted his chest. He turned to me and asked, "How is it? Did you see anything?" Seeing that he was fine, I relaxed. However, I couldn't see anything from that golden light. Hearing that, I turned to look at the light screen again. However, the golden light had disappeared, and it had returned to its original appearance. Among the spells and tools that I knew, the one that was closest to this golden light was the divine golden light spell that I had learned from the Death Scripture. However, these two golden lights were fundamentally different. The divine golden light spell's effect was unparalleled in defense, but it didn't have any attack power. However, the attack power of the golden light screen just now was not to be underestimated. Even the evil sacrificial spirit couldn't resist it, so the two were naturally different. I couldn't think of anything, so I shook my head. The evil sacrificial spirit didn't find it strange. He just nodded and said, "Stand here and don't move. I'm going to try again." That golden light isn't the most powerful thing in this place. The bronze man inside the golden light is the core existence. This time, I'll hold on a little longer so that you can see it more clearly. Then, he walked towards the light screen again. With the previous contact, the evil sacrificial spirit became even more cautious this time. When he was 2 steps away from the light screen, he stopped, paused for a moment, and then continued forward. The distance of 2 steps was short, but he was walking very slowly. I could feel that with every step he took, his aura became thicker and thicker. When he reached the light curtain, his body exuded an evil mist that looked like a thin veil that shrouded his body. Then, he raised his hand and pressed on the light screen again. Just like the previous time, the golden light appeared again. However, this time, the evil sacrificial spirit was well prepared. The distance within the golden light screen couldn't move him at all. In order to better observe the situation on the light screen, I lifted my leg and tried to take a few steps forward. However, right at this moment, the originally calm light screen suddenly shook. Not long after, the light screen that had already turned golden actually had a human figure slowly appearing. At first, those shadows only moved on the light screen. They punched and kicked the evil sacrificial spirit in front of the light screen. Each of their punches carried terrifying power. However, the evil sacrificial spirit was well prepared. He controlled the mist around him to create a shield in front of the light screen, completely blocking the attacks of those shadows. I was a little puzzled. Didn't the evil sacrificial spirit say that those bronze men were very strong? How come they were evenly matched? While I was pondering, the evil sacrificial spirit suddenly roared. Then his body, which was as steady as Mount Tai, began to retreat. Shortly after, the entire light screen rippled like water. One by one, the golden bronze men flew out of the light screen and chased after the evil sacrificial spirit. I had seen many bronze men in the 10-terminal formation, but these bronze men in front of me were different. The bronze men in front of me were dozens of feet tall and had different shapes. All of them looked ferocious. However, the bronze men in front of him were only the height of a normal person. Their facial features were regular, and their entire bodies were golden. Their muscles were bulging, and they gave off an imposing aura. The most obvious characteristic was that the heads of these bronze men were bald. After getting out of the golden light screen, the bronze men's aura rose again. Each of them looked like a god. At first, the evil sacrificial spirit could fight evenly with them. However, after they got out of the light screen, the evil sacrificial spirit could only struggle. After using his true essence to block another attack from the bronze men, the evil sacrificial spirit took the chance to ask me, how was it? Actually, I didn't need to wait for the evil sacrificial spirit to ask. At first glance, I knew something was wrong. Each bronze man had a different shape. Some were sitting on a deer, some were holding a pagoda, and some even had a divine dragon or a crouching tiger. All of them looked extraordinary. Not to mention me. Anyone who comes here at this moment would be able to recognize that these 18 bronze statues are the 18 arhats of Buddhism. Chapter 737. In Buddhist legends, the 18 arhats referred to the 18 arhats who lived eternally in this world and protected the righteous Dharma. According to legend, they were the disciples of the Buddha. Buddhism was divided into Mahayana and Minor Mahayana, and the arhats were Buddhists who had cultivated the Minor Mahayana to the great perfection. Although they weren't as powerful as the Bodhisattvas, they were still Buddhists who had achieved the great perfection and were no different from gods. Of course, these 18 phantoms couldn't be the real bodies of the 18 arhats. Otherwise, the evil sacrificial spirit wouldn't have only been injured. After observing for a while, I could tell from the power of these 18 phantoms that there was a wisp of Buddha's will in them. Although they weren't real bodies, they should be the arhat phantoms of some eminent monk who had used the supreme Buddha's will to nurture them for 100 years. This place was Chiyo's tomb, and it shouldn't have anything to do with Buddhism. The only possibility was that the evil sacrificial spirit was right. During the several thousand years he had been dormant, a Buddhist monk had come to this place. The phantoms of the 18 arhats and even the entire 10-terminal formation were arranged by a Buddhist monk. While I was pondering, a light flashed in front of me. I saw a bronze statue with Dragon Vanquisher Sage behind it on the left side of the evil sacrificial spirit. The statue used its claws to attack the evil sacrificial spirit. The surging Buddhist power illuminated the entire passage with golden light. Instinctively, I shouted at the evil sacrificial spirit, "Hurry up and come out. I know where they came from." Hearing my voice, the evil sacrificial spirit put down his hands that he had prepared to defend himself and turned around to retreat. However, he seemed to have underestimated the bronze man's speed. Just as he turned around, and before he could retreat, the shining bronze arhat man's claws had already reached his side. It was so fast that it created an explosive sound in the air, like a dragon's roar. I was anxious, but there was nothing I could do. A battle of this level wasn't something a small heavenly seal master like me could participate in. Not to mention the bronze statue's attack. I was afraid that I wouldn't be able to deal with it, even if it waved its hand. I could only shout again to warn the evil sacrificial spirit. However, the bronze arhat statue seemed to be even faster than the sound waves. As soon as I made the first sound, the bronze statue's hands were already on the evil sacrificial spirit's shoulders. Even with the naked eye, one could see what kind of power was contained in the copper man's claw. But strangely, after being struck by the claw, the evil sacrificial spirit was not sent flying. Instead, it was restrained by the claw. Suddenly, a golden dragon appeared from the copper man's arm and coiled around the evil sacrificial spirit's body, firmly restraining it and preventing it from moving. At the same time, the 17 bronze men behind the bronze man also swarmed forward like a tidal wave. A single bronze arhat man was already difficult for the evil sacrificial spirit to resist. How could the evil sacrificial spirit survive if all 18 bronze men attacked together? While I was still panic-stricken, the evil sacrificial spirit seemed to wake up like a sleeping lion. His body swelled, and a wisp of energy seeped out from under his skin. In just a blink of an eye, it had covered his entire body. Inside the black energy, his shriveled body swelled up again. Even the remaining half of his head seemed to grow back. In just a blink of an eye, it became whole again. Moreover, an arm grew out from each of his shoulders. Looking at the evil sacrificial spirit from a distance, I guessed that his current appearance was Chiyo's original appearance. However, in the legends, Chiyu had 3 heads and 6 arms. At this moment, he only had 4 arms. I guessed it was because his soul hadn't fully recovered yet. The evil sacrificial spirit, who was shrouded in black mist, swung his 4 arms. At first glance, he looked like a demon god hovering between heaven and earth. His 4 arms grabbed the golden dragon shadow that was coiling around his body. Then, he roared and smashed the dragon shadow. After regaining his freedom, the evil sacrificial spirit didn't attack the 18 bronze Arhut men again. He continued his previous action. His body turned, and the black mist shrouded him as he fled. In just a blink of an eye, he was in front of me. Before I could ask, the evil sacrificial spirit grabbed my shoulder and hissed, "Hurry, go." As soon as he said that, my body seemed to fly. In just a blink of an eye, we were out of the passage and heading toward the cave we had come from. I hastily turned my head around to take a look. The 18 bronze Arhut statues were aggressively chasing after us. It seemed they wouldn't stop until they killed us. As I recalled the battle between the 2 sides, I was panic-stricken. However, my panic didn't last long. Soon, I noticed that the bronze men had slowed down. A few seconds later, they stopped and looked at us from a distance. The evil sacrificial spirit seemed to know that we were coming. He stopped at this moment. When he turned around, the 18 bronze Arhut men stood in a row. They put their palms together and saluted us. Then they turned around and returned to the golden light curtain in the passage, disappearing. At this moment, I got a hold of myself. Those bronze Arhut men were in the last layer of the 10-terminal formation, so they couldn't go too far. As long as we left the passage, they wouldn't be able to chase after us. However, they had just fought to the death, and now they were saluting us. It was strange. The evil sacrificial spirit suddenly coughed and vomited black blood. The black mist shrouding him returned to his body, and the 2 extra arms disappeared. His body withered and returned to its original shape. I was worried that he was hurt. "Are you okay?" The evil sacrificial spirit shook his head as if he didn't care. "Tell me about those bronze men." "I'm okay." I didn't ask further. I thought for a while, then told him about the 18 Arhut men. Buddhism was introduced to China during the Han Dynasty. At that time, the evil sacrificial spirit had been asleep for more than 1,000 years. Of course, he didn't know these things. As for me, although I'd been studying metaphysics for a long time, I didn't know much about Buddhism. I didn't have much contact with them. The only contact I had was with Miao Ju, the monk who had helped me in the underground cellar in Shenzhen. Miao Ju had invited me to the reclining Buddha temple to discuss Buddhism. However, I had been busy with other things and had forgotten about it. I briefly told the evil sacrificial spirit what I knew about Buddhism. However, before the evil sacrificial spirit could answer, the golden light curtain in the distance started to change. At this moment, the 18 bronze Arhut men had just entered. The light curtain, which used to be as calm as an ancient well, suddenly rippled, and a series of patterns emerged. I glanced at them and vaguely recognized the patterns. They were Sanskrit. Sanskrit was an ancient Indian language, which was also the language of Buddhism. It was normal for the 18 bronze Arhut men to have Sanskrit on them. However, although I knew a lot about geomancy and metaphysics, I was a complete layman in Buddhism. Of course, I didn't know these complicated Sanskrit characters. The evil sacrificial spirit didn't even know the 18 Arhats, let alone Sanskrit characters. While explaining to the evil sacrificial spirit, I continued to study the Sanskrit characters on the light curtain. It was strange. The Sanskrit characters looked like scribbles, but as I stared at them, my mind began to understand their meaning. The Sanskrit roughly explained the cause of this seal. It was said that a monk named F.A. Yuan had discovered this place when he was traveling around the world. He observed the monstrous demonic aura within the seal, and after some investigation, he still could not figure out what was inside. He was also afraid that the demonic creature would come out and bring disaster to the human world, so he stayed here until he passed away. He even combined his cultivation with a temple treasure in his hand to leave this seal. At the end of the Sanskrit characters, it was written that only monks with a predestined relationship with Buddhism could read these characters. Of course, The monks who could read these characters had to inherit his will and continue to explore this place until the demon inside was completely destroyed. If they didn't have enough strength, they could go to the light curtain and chant the name of Buddha to take the Buddhist treasure to help them. After reading the characters, I was speechless. According to Fa Yuan, only monks with a predestined relationship with Buddhism could read these Sanskrit characters. However, I wasn't a monk, nor was I an eminent monk. How could I read these characters? Did I have the predestined relationship with Buddhism that he had mentioned? After pondering for a long time, I couldn't find an answer. After explaining to the evil sacrificial spirit, he kept silent for a while. Then he said, "The power of the magical treasures in this place isn't ordinary. I should follow the Sanskrit characters to take the Buddhist treasure." I had the same idea. I carefully walked into the passage and arrived in front of the golden light curtain. Different from the evil sacrificial spirit, the bronze Arhut statues didn't appear on the light curtain after I entered. According to the Sanskrit characters, I stood in front of the light curtain and chanted the name of Buddha. As soon as I chanted, the light curtain in front of me collapsed and fell into my hand, turning into a string of Buddhist beads. I carefully held the beads in front of my eyes to observe them. The beads on the string were ochre in color. They weren't perfectly round, but each bead had the shape of a reclining Buddha. The beads' bellies were engraved with many Sanskrit characters. Although I understood the Sanskrit characters on the light curtain, I couldn't understand a single word of the Sanskrit characters on the string of beads. Chapter 738. In the ancestral vein of one mountain, Miao Ju had used the prayer beads in his hand to force Chun Yangting to retreat. In front of the Han family's heavenly master in Longhu Mountain, he had said that he would save my life. I still remembered what he had said. He said that I had a predestined relationship with Buddhism. He had even asked me to visit Crouching Buddha Temple when I had time. If I hadn't seen those Sanskrit words, I would have thought that Miao Ju's invitation was just an excuse to protect me at that critical moment. From the appearance of the prayer beads, they were more or less related to Crouching Buddha Temple. Perhaps the monk called Fa Yuan was an eminent monk of Crouching Buddha Temple. Prayer beads were a kind of magic tool for monks. A powerful magic tool was very important to a sect. I was sure that the prayer beads in my hand weren't inferior to the one in Miao Ju's hand. Moreover, I didn't know much about Buddhism, so this thing could only be used as an ornament. It seemed I had to find time to visit Crouching Buddha Temple and return this thing. After putting the prayer beads back into the Shangliu pouch, I called out to Chi Yu, the evil, sacrificial spirit, to leave this place. Although this place was Chiyo's tomb, I was still scared after what I had just experienced. I couldn't stay here any longer. However, I stopped halfway. I had forgotten that there was something I hadn't done yet. The evil sacrificial spirit behind me saw that I had stopped. He gently approached me and asked, "What's the matter?" I had promised Wiyue that I would bring Lu Ruxu's body out and find a place to bury it. I told him about it briefly. The evil sacrificial spirit didn't say much. He just told me that he would wait for me here and that I should come back as soon as possible. I nodded, turned around, and walked toward the 10-terminal formation. The fatty and I had broken the 10-terminal formation, and I had the prayer beads in my hand. It wouldn't be activated again. I didn't encounter any obstacles along the way. When I returned to Blood Maple Forest, I couldn't help but feel sad when I saw the devastation on the ground. The tragic scene where Wiyue had imitated Neza in cutting his intestines and scraping his bones to repay his parents was still vivid in my mind. I had thought that Wiyue and his wife would have a new beginning when they reunited after 100 years. Who would have thought that this would be the result? After searching for a while in the Blood Maple Forest, he finally found the remains of Lu Ruxu. Unfortunately, Wiyue was a Guqin spirit and did not have a physical body. Their love for each other moved me. They had suffered a lot when they were alive. Now, one of them had become a ghost, and the other's life and death were unknown. I wanted to see if I could find Wu Yu's belongings so that I could bury her and her husband together. This was the best I could do. But now, it seemed that the couple's joint burial would not be completed. Just as I was about to return, I glanced at the ground and saw a few thin white silk threads. This reminded me of how Wuyue had resolutely severed his soul. Are these the strings of the Fushi zither? I held them in my hands. They were no different from ordinary zither strings. They didn't have any spiritual energy fluctuations. I clenched my fists. Since Wuyue was a Guqin spirit, these strings were no different from her body. Burying them together with Lu Ruxu's remains would be a perfect ending for the couple. Before leaving the Blood Maple Forest, I subconsciously looked at the cave behind me. The cave had become a ruin. According to Lu Ruxu, the people from Mount Longhu were all trapped inside. It seemed that they wouldn't be able to escape for a while. I couldn't help but feel happy when I saw this scene. Although I didn't have a big grudge against those cow noses, they had treated Wuyue and her husband. They had even forced Wuyue into a dead end. This kind of punishment couldn't resolve the hatred in their hearts. As early as when Wuyue told me about her and Lu Ruxu, I unconsciously thought of Hua Hua and me. Perhaps it was because we had the same experience, but my attitude toward this matter was clear. I would do my best to protect the two of them. It was also a way to comfort myself. If I could successfully save the two of them, it would greatly stimulate my desire to be with Hua Hua in the future. Although the ending wasn't ideal, Wuyue was still alive, and Lu Ruxu had successfully escaped. It was only a matter of time before the two of them met again. With this thought, I couldn't help but snort and shake my body. It was a disguised form of encouragement for myself. After leaving the 10-terminal formation, the evil sacrificial spirit was still waiting. Seeing my relaxed face, it didn't say anything. It just nodded and strode forward, ready to take me out of this place. The fatty and I had mysteriously entered this tomb. We didn't know which way was north, south, east, or west. Fortunately, this was a place where evil spirits were worshipped. We didn't have to spend much effort on the way out of Chiyo's tomb. The place where we were standing now was the Holy Mother Temple. I turned around and gazed at the sacrificial altar in front of me. At this moment, it was a little damaged. Perhaps this formation would be damaged after each use. I didn't linger on this matter. I was thinking about whether I should destroy this sacrificial altar or not. Although I didn't know how many exits there were in Chiyo's tomb, since the evil sacrificial spirit had taken me out of this place, there shouldn't be any other exit. If that was the case, I was inclined to destroy it. First, I didn't need to keep this Chiyo's tomb. Second, I was afraid that Lu Xingyang would escape from the tomb after receiving Chiyo's inheritance. I didn't know what he had done in his previous life. Every time he encountered danger, he could turn misfortune into fortune. With the power of the evil sacrificial spirit, he wasn't afraid of Lu Xingyang. If he didn't worry about leaving Lu Xingyang in the tomb and letting him receive Chiyo's inheritance, he must have believed that this tomb could trap him inside. On the other hand, I felt a little guilty. If I let Lu Xingyang escape, it would be even more difficult for me to deal with him. While I was hesitating, the evil sacrificial spirit saw my anxiety and said, "You don't need to worry too much. You're a person who cultivates shaman energy. You become a target for everyone. When you become successful, you won't need to be afraid of these clowns." I grinned. I was the one who was a little cowardly. After going through so many things, I no longer had the pride that a young man should have. I just wanted to return to the Fire God Temple and stay with Hua Hua for a long time. To say something irresponsible, even if the world turned upside down, what did it have to do with me? Thinking about this, I couldn't help but feel a raging fire in my heart. I waved my hand and sent streams of energy towards the sacrificial altar. In an instant, the sacrificial altar exploded and turned into dust. I waved my hand and brought the evil sacrificial spirit out of the Holy Mother Temple. I was going to find a good place to bury Wuyue and his wife. After searching around the mountain, I finally found an auspicious spot. This spot was located in the small forest on the mountainside. This forest was a slightly auspicious spot, one of the 4 perilous spots. I had originally planned to bury Wuyue and his wife here, but I didn't expect to meet the young Taoist from Mount Longhu. He probably didn't expect me to come out alive. He looked surprised and happy. He shouted at me, "Master, are you okay? Did you see my martial uncles and Taoist son inside? Are they okay?" They'll definitely be fine. Dao's son and the rest are so strong. They'll definitely be fine. I looked at the little fellow and had mixed feelings. I didn't know how to tell him what had happened. In the end, I patted his head and said, "Yes, I'm fine." The little fellow nodded and wanted to ask something. I raised my hand and interrupted him. I really couldn't bear to continue being entangled with this ignorant child. I could only lie to him and say that his master and martial uncles had already come out. They had encountered some matters on the way, so they returned to the sect first. The little Taoist was a little disappointed after hearing that. He scratched his head and thought for a while. He looked up at the Holy Mother Temple and said softly, "I won't disturb you anymore. I'll return to the sect to report." After saying that, he cupped his hands and turned to go down the mountain. Looking at the little Taoist's back, I couldn't help but think of what Lu Ruxu and Dao's son had said in the tomb. The Taoist of Mount Longhu probably wouldn't be able to come out. It seemed that Celestial Master Zhang would have to choose a new Taoist. I could only hope that this kid was lucky and wouldn't be chosen. After the little Taoist left, I took the evil sacrificial spirit to walk around the forest. Finally, I found a relatively good place and prepared to start digging the tomb. I originally planned to go down the mountain to find some villagers to help me dig the tomb. However, when they heard that I was going to bury people in the mountain, they were unwilling to come. Not only that, but they also earnestly advised me not to bury people in the mountain. Otherwise, the family that was buried would have no descendants. Of course, I knew that this place wasn't suitable for burial. This was a suicide position, the most dangerous place among the 4 ominous positions. Even the safest place in the suicide position wasn't a place to bury old friends. Otherwise, a sudden epidemic would be a small matter. A sudden disaster from the heavens would cause the family to have no descendants. After all, whether it was in there or my heart, continuing to have descendants was a big matter that couldn't be underestimated. However, Wu Yu and his wife's situation was different. They were dead, and they didn't have descendants. As long as there was a place to preserve their remains, it would be fine. And the position I had chosen was just the right place to do that. After talking for a long time, the villagers still didn't want to go up the mountain with me. In the end, I could only take the evil sacrificial spirit and return. The 2 of us spent half a day to make that area suitable for the couple to be buried together. Normally, if a couple didn't die at the same time, they would need to leave the left for the man or the right for the woman. This way, the details of the burial would change, and it would be difficult to be buried together. There were 3 types of burial in the cemetery: burial in the same cave, burial in different caves, and burial in the same grave but different caves. These were different types of burial. The next was burial in the same cave. In the Lus Plateau of the north, this type of burial was very popular. When one of the couple passed away, they would be buried first. When the other died, they would dig up the grave with the man on the left and the woman on the right. The coffin would be placed side by side, with a red cloth tied across the coffin. It was similar to the knot a couple would tie at a wedding. Among the minority groups in the Southwest, there were also couples who were buried in the same coffin. The cliff burial of Baiku Yao and Guangxi was like this. One could see the bones of a man and a woman in one coffin. Burial in the same chamber was relatively simple. First, we would put the coffin of the deceased in the chamber. Then we would open the door of the tomb and put the new coffin in. After digging the well, I prepared everything for Wu Yu and his wife, such as coffins and burial clothes. According to the customs of Hebei, burying the dead had many procedures, such as the first death, the announcement of the funeral, the mortuary, and so on. However, Wu Yu and his wife's situation was special, and we didn't have much time, so we simply followed my procedures. Chapter 739. As soon as I descended the mountain, I stopped. The evil sacrificial spirit was puzzled and asked, "What's the matter?" I didn't answer him immediately. I had told Wang Kuan at the airport that I would definitely cure little Wang Li after this matter was over. However, I had only said those words to comfort him on a whim. Now that the matter here was over, it was obvious that I had to return. However, if I didn't treat little Wang Li after returning, Wouldn't I hurt Wang Kun and his wife? I sighed as I thought about this. After the evil sacrificial spirit heard my words, he looked pensive. He didn't know about little Wang Li's matter. At that time, he was still in the Inshu royal tomb. However, looking at his current appearance, he seemed to have his own thoughts. I couldn't help but be curious, so I asked, "Do you have a solution?" After hearing my words, he didn't immediately reply. He just smacked his lips and asked me to tell him about little Wang Li's matter in detail. I was overjoyed. Although he didn't immediately agree, his current state showed that he had a solution. I couldn't help but be overjoyed. After more than a year of contact, not to mention Wang Yongjun and Wang Kun, I liked little Wang Li very much. Not to mention that he was Zhang Kanwen's disciple, the successor of Mount Wen. Back then, I had personally promised Grandpa Zhao that I would continue the inheritance of Mount Wen. Now that I seemed to have found a solution, I didn't dare to be careless. I immediately told the whole story to the evil, sacrificial spirit. I even told him all the methods that Zhang Kanwen and I had used in the past year. After I finished talking, I didn't dare to breathe. I stared at the evil, sacrificial spirit who was deep in thought. I hoped that he would find a solution. The evil, sacrificial spirit pondered for a moment. Suddenly, a light flashed in his eyes and the corners of his mouth rose. I saw all these details. My heart tightened, and I quickly asked, "Do you have a solution?" He stared at me and nodded lightly. "That's right. If everything is as you said, then I have a countermeasure. Not only that, but I can also restore 80% of my power when I was in the 3-tripod stage." His words surprised me. Every time I treated little Wang Li, I had to be very careful. Not only that, but I would also consume a lot of shaman energy. However, from what the evil sacrificial spirit had said, not only would it not consume energy, but it would also increase its power. I didn't understand. After listening to my doubts, the evil sacrificial spirit couldn't keep his face straight. He laughed and told me the whole story. The reason that the Yellow Emperor was able to defeat Chiyo's army was that he had killed Chiyo's army and used its skin to make 80 drums. After the Yellow Emperor set up the Chimen Duanjia, he ordered his soldiers to use the bones of the Thunder Beast to beat the 80 drums made from the skin of the Kuei cow. For a moment, the sound of the drums was so loud that it could travel 500 miles in one go and 3,800 miles in a row. The entire battlefield was shaking and the mountains were shaking. The sky was spinning and the earth was spinning. After Chiyu was killed by the Yellow Emperor, his head and body were separated and buried. Not only that, but his 3 souls were also separated and thrown into the 9 abyss to prevent him from reincarnating. Now, Chiyu had found 2 souls, and he only needed 1 more to recover. Listening to this, my mouth dropped open. I knew what had happened before, and I could find the information in the documents. However, I had never heard of Chiyu being sent into the 9 abyss by the Yellow Emperor's soul. I didn't expect such a thing to happen. If he hadn't said it himself, I wouldn't have believed it. But after saying so much, what are you trying to say? I was a little confused. But then I thought of something and exclaimed, "Could it be?" Before I could finish, the evil sacrificial spirit faced the sky and laughed. I didn't expect that the last wisp of his soul would be found. Sure enough, it was just as I had thought. The ghostly black smoke in little Wang Li's body was the last wisp of Chiyo's soul. If that was the case, he would have a way to retrieve his soul. Then, there was nothing to worry about little Wang Li's body. I couldn't help but sigh in relief. If little Wang Li was completely cured, it would also cure Zhang Kanwen's heart disease. The most important thing was that when Shan's lineage would be able to continue well from now on. I would be able to face Lord Zhao's spirit in heaven. I couldn't hide my excitement. I hated that I couldn't bring the evil, sacrificial spirit back to Shenzhen. However, what he said next extinguished the hope that had just ignited in my heart. The evil, sacrificial spirit returned to his previous appearance. Then he frowned and said, "It's not difficult to retrieve that wisp of soul, but we need to make some preparations. We need to build a Kuei ox altar. There was one just now, but you destroyed it." After listening to him, I subconsciously looked in the direction of the Holy Mother Temple. I looked speechless as if I had eaten a dead fly. I hadn't expected that the Kuei Ox altar would be an important part of Little Wang Li's treatment. If I had known earlier, I wouldn't have blown it up. I couldn't help but feel regretful. However, I also resented the evil sacrificial spirit. If he hadn't instigated me, I wouldn't have destroyed the altar. The ready-made sacrificial altar was gone. What should I do now? The evil sacrificial spirit seemed to sense the blame in my eyes. He paused and comforted me. Don't panic. Since the Kuei Ox altar here has been destroyed, we just need to find another Kuei Ox. After listening to him, I sighed. He wasn't comforting me. He was just giving advice in hindsight. This was the only solution we had. However, the Kuei Ox was an ancient divine beast. After thousands of years, I didn't know if such a beast still existed in this world. If it did, I didn't know how to find it. The evil sacrificial spirit was puzzled when he saw that my face didn't look better. After I told him about my doubts, he burst out laughing and said that I was too impatient. If the Kuei Ox altar is here, it means the Kuei Ox should still exist. I just need to find the person who built this altar and ask him. After listening to him, I suddenly understood. When I had entered the Holy Mother Temple, Wu Yu had told me that the Kuei Ox altar was built by Lu Ruxu. He had asked me if I knew the altar. I immediately took out the small box containing the Green Lantern Scroll from my Xianglu pouch. I had already confirmed that the Green Lantern Scroll was the second half of the Death Scripture. In the past, I definitely wouldn't have taken it out in front of anyone. However, the evil sacrificial spirit and I had a different relationship. I didn't have any misgivings with him. I gently opened the box and called Lu Ruxu's name. As soon as I finished speaking, a hazy figure appeared in front of me. I saw Lu Ruxu standing a meter away from me. She bowed to me and said, "Master, why did you summon me?" I wasn't used to people calling me that, but I didn't care about it. I waved my hand to dismiss him. I heard from Wu Yu that the Kuei Ox altar in the Holy Mother Temple was built by you. I want to ask you, where did you get the Kuei Ox's skull? Master, I found the Kuei Ox's skull in a barren tomb 100 years ago. Lu Ruxu immediately replied. I was elated and asked him where the barren tomb was and if there was a Kuei Ox's skull there. I didn't expect that Lu Ruxu's reply would dishearten me. 100 years ago, Lu Ruxu was still a Taoist of Mount Longhu. By chance, he found information about the Kuei Ox's skull in the library of Mount Longhu. After eloping with Wu Yu, he went to the top of Pagoda Village and built the Holy Mother Temple. He then went to the barren tomb, and after a narrow escape, he found the Kuei Ox's skull. He then built the Kuei Ox altar and entered Chiyo's tomb. The information only recorded one Kuei Ox's skull. I didn't know if there were other Kuei Ox's skulls in this world. After he said that, the atmosphere became extremely gloomy. The occasional chirping of birds in the surroundings was really ear-piercing, making me feel annoyed. Lu Ruxu saw my gloomy expression and rolled his eyes. Master, don't be anxious. From what I know, the Kuei Ox originates from the East China Sea. Perhaps we can find traces of it in the East China Sea. How could I not know what he meant? I had read about the Kuei Ox in the past. The Kuei Ox was a mythical beast in the classic of mountains and seas. Shaped like an ox, with a white body without horns and one leg. When it enters and exits the water, there will be wind and rain. Its light is like the sun and moon, and its voice is like thunder. Its name is Kuei. However, many ancient books said that Kuei was a snake-like monster. Kuei, a divine charm, like the leg of a dragon. The Kuei Ox originated from a place called Billows Mountain in the East China Sea. According to the records, Billows Mountain was 7,000 li away from the coastline. Not to mention whether Billows Mountain really existed, just the fact that it was 7,000 li above the East China Sea was enough to make people gasp in amazement. If I hadn't seen the real Kuei Ox's skull before, I wouldn't have cared. Since I had seen it, it proved that the creature definitely existed. However, it seemed that finding a living Kuei Ox was only a theoretical possibility. After Lu Ruxu heard what I said, he lowered his head and silently pondered. After half a minute, he opened his mouth again. It's still too early to give up. In Yugong, it says, Qingzhou Wei and Zi are two roads, and the seashore is wide. This is the East China Sea in the present Dengzhou. According to what I know, the East China Sea in ancient times is the current Yellow Sea. Even though we don't know if Billows Mountain is really above the Yellow Sea, we should at least go there to investigate before we know. His words pull me back from my dejected mood. Currently, there was indeed only one way to go. Since there was still a sliver of hope, we couldn't just give up. If we really couldn't find Billows Mountain, we would make other plans. Chapter 740. After we left the mountain, we didn't rush to the Yellow Sea. Instead, we planned to return to Zhuolu County to rest for the night before continuing our journey. However, it was already dark and there were no cars on the deserted mountain. Eventually, we had no choice but to return to Tower Village and find a farmer to stay for the night. The next day, we left Tower Village early in the morning. We hailed a taxi at the foot of the mountain and hurried to the county. Zhuolu County was located in Zhangjiago City, Hebei Province, and the nearest Yellow Sea port to Zhangjiago was Qingdao. Although the distance between the two places wasn't far, the evil sacrificial spirit didn't have any identification. He couldn't take public transportation. After thinking for a while, we decided to take a taxi to Qingdao. When we arrived at Qingdao, it was almost evening. We found a hotel and checked in. Then, we discussed our next step with the evil sacrificial spirit and Lu Ruxu. Although the evil sacrificial spirit was from that era, he didn't participate much in this matter. That was why he didn't say much. Lu Ruxu, on the other hand, had studied the Kuei a lot. She took the lead during the whole process. Lu Ruxu thought that we should explore the surrounding terrain. It would be best if we could find the local chronicles of Qingdao to see if we could find any information about the legendary Billows Mountain. During the Neolithic Age, Qingdao was one of the main areas where the Eastern barbarians lived and thrived. It had the rich and colorful Danke culture, Longshan culture, and Yuesher culture. Perhaps we could start from there. Lu Rux's idea was clear and logical. Before the sky turned dark, I left the hotel on an empty stomach and went to a bookstore to buy some travel guides about Qingdao. It was one of the fastest ways to understand the geography and culture of this place. As soon as I returned to the lobby of the hotel, I felt a strong Taoist aura around me. Instinctively, I looked around and saw a middle-aged Taoist wearing a green Taoist robe and a primeval hat sitting on the sofa. He seemed to have noticed my gaze. His closed eyes suddenly opened and looked in my direction. With just one glance, I could tell that this man wasn't ordinary. He was at least at the early stage of the Seal Heavenly Master Realm. I couldn't help but be vigilant. It wasn't a good thing to meet a Seal Heavenly Master here. Moreover, this man had appeared out of nowhere. After the previous events, I had an instinctive aversion to Taoist people. After thinking about it, I decided it was better to avoid unnecessary trouble. I pretended that I didn't know anything. I retracted my gaze and prepared to return to my room. Just as he closed the door and before he could sit down, there was a knock on the door. I furrowed my brows and asked from the doorway, "Who is it?" "Mr. Zhou, I have something important to tell you. Please open the door and let this poor Taoist speak in detail." The person at the door spoke with great vigor and was quite courteous. As soon as I heard his voice, I remembered the Taoist in blue I had just met. I opened the door and saw that it was him. Since he was coming for me, there was no reason for me to hide. I paused and subconsciously mobilized my Tao Qi. I was slightly on guard. After opening the door, the Taoist priest didn't come in. Instead, he stood on the spot and cupped his hands towards me. "I am Lu Zongxing of Laozhan. Today, I have come under the orders of my master to invite Mr. Zhou to my Supreme Purity Palace for a chat." Looking at his appearance, he didn't seem like he was here to cause trouble. However, I had never come into contact with this Supreme Purity Palace. After pondering for a moment, I still nodded and politely said, "Taoist priest is too courteous. Please enter the room to speak." After saying that, he stepped aside to let him enter the house. After the Taoist priest sat down, I took the initiative to ask, "Taoist priest Lu, do you recognize me?" Lu Zongxing cupped his hands towards me. My Laozhan mountain was fortunate enough to occupy one of the 72 blessed lands. A few days ago, I followed my senior martial brothers to the heavenly grand ritual and had the opportunity to meet Mr. Zhou. It was during that trip to Mount Wangwu that I learned of Mr. Zhou's peerless talent. After hearing his words, I relaxed. Since he was from one of the 72 blessed lands, he most likely wasn't here to cause trouble. Taoist priest is too serious. May I ask why you have come today? I handed him a cup of tea. Will Mr. Zhou be free in 3 days? The Taoist priest, surnamed Liu, had a smile on his face as he cautiously sat down on the sofa. I furrowed my brows. I had never had any dealings with the Laozon Mountain Taoists. I had just arrived, so why did they come looking for me? From the words of the Taoist priest surnamed Liu, there was clearly a reason. After pondering for a moment, I asked Liu Zongqing, "Did his master tell you the reason?" He didn't tell me. He only told me to bring a message to Mr. Zhou, saying that Laozon Mountain is willing to help with this matter. After Liu Zongqing said this, he stood up and cupped his hands to bid farewell. On this trip to the Eastern Sea, I had only come for the Kuan Yin. I wanted to visit Mount Liubo and didn't want to cause any trouble. Moreover, I didn't have a good impression of these ox-nosed Taoists. However, after hearing his last words, my heart was slightly moved. Mount Liubo was only a rumor. I wasn't sure if I could find it on this trip. Moreover, the Laozon Mountain Taoists were locals. If they could give me some advice, I would have more confidence in this matter. I discussed this matter with the evil sacrificial spirit and asked for his opinion. I didn't know if the evil sacrificial spirit had heard of Laozon Mountain, but his expression didn't seem to care. He nodded and said, "Since this Laozon Taoist priest is help, why shouldn't I go?" He was very straightforward. I nodded and made up my mind. In the next few days, I would look around. If I didn't have any clues, I would go to the Supreme Purity Temple. It wouldn't hurt. Laozon Mountain was known as Laozon Mountain in ancient times. It was also the Supreme Purity Blessed Land, one of the 72 blessed lands. During the reign of Emperor Wu of the Western Han Dynasty, Zhang Lianfu came to Laozon Mountain to build a thatched nunnery to worship the 3 officials and his disciples. He had established the foundation of Laozon Taoism. From the Western Han Dynasty to the end of the 5 Dynasties period, Laozon Taoism belonged to the Taiping Taoism and the Celestial Master Taoism, reformed by Ko Qianji during the Northern and Southern Dynasties. Since the Jin and Yuan dynasties, the Chuanjin Taoism had risen. The temples on Laozon Mountain had converted to the 7 true sects of the north. After Genghis Khan appointed Qiu Chuji, Laozon Taoism flourished. Thus, Laozon Mountain now had 9 palaces, 8 temples, and 72 nunneries. The Taoists all belonged to the Chuanjin Taoism sect. From this, it could be seen that Laozon Mountain had a profound foundation. The Celestial Master Seal had even sent a letter. From his words, it seemed that his elders were also in the Supreme Purity Temple. This meant that Laozon Mountain didn't lack Celestial Master Realm experts. If he really wanted to cause trouble, he didn't have to be so courteous as to invite me up the mountain to talk about old times. In the next 3 days, the fatty and the demon refining gourd didn't do anything. I didn't stay idle. I tried to find information about Mount Billows, but I didn't have any clues. Qingdao was a place with a large number of foreigners. Moreover, in the eyes of ordinary people, the ancient legends were vague and illusory. Even if I could find a native, it would be hard for him to know about it. Later on, I went to the library to find the local chronicles. After flipping through them, I found that most of the contents were practical. They recorded human geography. Moreover, what we were looking for was something from several thousand years ago. Regarding this aspect, it wasn't recorded in the local books. Perhaps it had existed before, but it had been involved in the storm that year. Now, it seemed that it had disappeared. Thus, the biggest possibility was the trip to Laozon Mountain the next day. Early the next morning, Liu Zongqing from Laozon Mountain knocked on my door. He told me that his teacher had asked me to go to the mountain. I didn't refuse. I brought the evil, sacrificial spirit and followed Liu Zongqing to Laozon Mountain. He learned from Liu Zongqing that Laozon Taoism was located in Qingdao's Laozon district, named after the Laozon mountain range. Mount Lao was divided into three branches: Jufeng, Sherman Mountain, and Wu Mountain. Jufeng was the main branch, and it was also the location of the 9 palaces, 8 temples, and 72 nunneries of Mount Lao. It was also our destination. As for Supreme Purity Temple, it was located on Laojun Peak at the bottom of the giant peak. Among the Taoist temples on Mount Lao, it had the longest history, the best space, the largest scale, the largest number of Taoists, and the deepest influence. Surrounded by mountains on 3 sides and facing the sea on one side, the scenery was beautiful. The records of the Supreme Qing Palace recorded that in the first year of the Jianyuan period of the Western Han Dynasty, it was founded by Zhang Lianfu of the Ruwei Prefecture in Jiangxi. Zhang Lianfu was erudite and talented. He was the highest official, but because of his influence and power, he abandoned his position and entered the Tao. He studied metaphysics and did not involve himself with the secular world. Later, he entered Mount Zhongnan and received his master's teachings. Later, he was invited to travel to the ends of the world. He came to Mount Lao and built a thatched cottage to worship the 3 great emperors. In the year of Gui Mao, he built a temple to enshrine the 3 pure ones and renamed it the Taiqing Palace. In the second year of Xiwan, he appointed his disciples Lu Fangqing and the others to continue the work of the temple, while he returned to Jiangxi and lived in seclusion in the Sanyuan Palace. In the future, he would frequently visit Mount Lao and tour the famous places of the East Sea. Therefore, Mount Lao was named after the Grand Pure One among the 72 blessed lands. Our hotel was located in the southern part of the city. It wasn't too far from Mount Lao's scenic area. We arrived there in about an hour. Although it wasn't a special festival, there were many vehicles of all sizes parked in front of Mount Laoshan's scenic area. There were also many tourists coming and going. It seemed that the development of Mount Laozhan had indeed made great progress in recent years. Mount Lao's scenery was worthy of its title as one of the 7 famous mountains. However, we didn't have the mood to stay and admire it. Under Lu Zongqing's lead, we went around the development zone and turned into a small path, heading directly to the Taiqing Palace. Due to my instinct as a geomancy master, I paid attention to the surrounding geomancy along the way. However, after observing for a long time, I could only get a general idea. Moreover, I felt that there was some kind of restriction here. The aura of geomancy here was much more vague than in other places. Lu Zongqing, who was walking next to me, noticed my confusion. He smiled and explained, "Mr. Zhou is a dragon among men. Of course, you're very skilled in feng shui. However, our Lao Mountain is not a normal place. This is the cultivation ground of our Lao Mountain disciples. Moreover, it is in the secular world, so we naturally have to protect it. Thus, the founder of Mount Lao set up a restriction here to prevent external forces from destroying our precious cultivation ground." Chapter 741. We walked along the mountain path for more than an hour, but we didn't see anyone along the way. It wasn't until we crossed a mountain that we saw Taoist priests in blue robes working in the fields. Taoism emphasized inaction, which meant that if one was right, the world would be right. Inaction meant following the laws of nature. That was why Taoist cultivation didn't adhere to any form, but rather followed the will of the heavens. However, the Taoist priests in the secular world didn't have such a state of mind. It seemed that Mount Lao had gone through 1,000 years of turmoil, but it was still able to protect its origin. This place was a ridge between 2 mountains, which formed a flat area. I followed Lu Zongqing down the mountain. At this moment, Taoist priests passed by us one after another. When they saw Lu Zongqing, they bowed and greeted him, "Elder." I was a little surprised. I didn't expect that Lu Zongqing was an elder of Mount Lao. It seemed that my previous thoughts were too rash. If Laozhan sent an elder to deliver a message, it was enough to show how much they valued me. Thinking about that, I turned around and saw that his face didn't change. It seemed that he didn't care about the title of an elder. Lu Zongqing saw my reaction and explained with a smile, "Mr. Zhou is a dragon among men, an outstanding talent of the present age. That's why I didn't dare to call myself an elder. Moreover, I've been cultivating on this mountain since I was young, so the title of elder is just an excuse for my age. He spoke humbly and had been cultivating on this mountain since he was young. He had a pure and kind nature, which made my good impression on him increase. Compared to the cowardly noses of Mount Longhu, this kind of person was unworldly. Then, he pointed at the mountain in front of us. Our Mount Lao's Supreme Purity Palace is in front of us. Mr. Zhou, we should hurry. My master has been waiting for us on the mountain for a long time. Then, he stepped aside and let me go first. I followed him and moved forward. I was interested in his words. If Lu Zongqing was an elder of Mount Lao, then his master should be the sect master of Mount Lao. After asking, Lu Zongqing nodded and bowed toward the mountain. Mr. Zhou is right. My master is the current sect master of Mount Lao. Judging from Lu Zongqing's cultivation, his master is at least at the yang spirit level. Back at the heavenly grand ritual, I didn't have much of an impression of Mount Lao. Furthermore, according to Lu Zongqing, Mount Lao was only ranked among the blessed lands and didn't get a spot in the 36 heavenly paradises. Since there was a young god celestial master, it was not known if this Laozhan Taoist was deliberately hiding it, or if they were used to living in seclusion. As I thought about it, I didn't pay too much attention to it. Using the excuse of praising Lu Zongqing's cultivation base, I asked about his master's cultivation base. Lu Zongqing smiled and told me he has 6 martial brothers, and his cultivation base is the lowest. Among the other 5, 2 of them are yang spirit warriors, and the other 3 are at the late stage of the seal realm. Hearing him say that, I was a little frightened. 2 of them had the cultivation of yang god celestial master. So what realm had their sect master reached? Could it be that he had already broken through? As soon as I thought of it, I felt that it was impossible. If the Laozhan sect master really had a cultivation base at the heavenly grand ritual, he wouldn't need to hide it. Not to mention the 36 minor heavenly caves. He might even have a chance to enter the 10 major heavenly caves. Cultivators at the yang spirit realm were the closest to the great Tao. I knew that the Laozhan sect master didn't have such a cultivation base, but I still felt scared. While I was pondering, the evil sacrificial spirit suddenly turned to look at me. After seeing the evil sacrificial spirit, I felt relieved. With him here, even if the Laozhan sect master was a hidden expert, it didn't matter. Although I hadn't asked about the evil sacrificial spirit's cultivation base, he was at least at the ascending realm, and it was even possible that he had reached the red cloud realm. With him here, even if there were 2 Laozhan sect masters, we would still be safe. With that thought, I exhaled and stopped thinking about it, heading up the mountain with large strides. This place was shaded by greenery. Standing at the foot of the mountain, I couldn't see any traces of any buildings. I followed Lu Zongqing to a small path around the mountain. Previously, I hadn't been able to see how tall the mountain was from the foot of the mountain. Now, it seemed that I was only able to see the mountain. After walking for about an hour, we finally reached the gate of the Supreme Purity Palace. At this moment, the gate was closed, and there were 2 young Taoist priests standing at the gate. When the 2 young Taoist priests saw us coming, they respectfully greeted Lu Zongqing, elder, and then slowly opened the gate. Lu Zongqing turned around and cupped his hands at me. Then, he made an inviting gesture and said with a smile, "The sect master has ordered that the Supreme Purity Palace is closed today. Only Mr. Zhou can enter. I can only escort you here." Then, he looked at the evil sacrificial spirit behind me, and then at me, asking for my opinion. His words made me frown. Originally, I thought that with the evil sacrificial spirit, there wouldn't be a problem. Who would have thought that there would be such a situation? I turned to look at the evil sacrificial spirit, my eyes inquiring. The evil sacrificial spirit didn't wait for me to ask. He nodded and said to me, "Go. I'll stay here. If there's any danger, I'll be there in one breath." With the evil sacrificial spirit's words, I didn't have to worry anymore. I nodded and cupped my hands at Lu Zongqing. Then, I stepped into the Supreme Purity Palace. As soon as my feet touched the ground, the palace gate closed. The Supreme Purity Palace was the largest Taoist temple on Mount Lao. I had thought that it would be as grand as the Mahavira Hall of Buddhism. I hadn't expected that it would be so simple and simple. It was just a small courtyard. When he was reading the Tsingtao tourist guide, he vaguely remembered that he had seen a picture of the Taiching Palace. The grandeur of that building was much better than the one here. Moreover, a large number of believers worshipped it. Presumably, it was built to deceive people. The simple courtyard in front of him was the real Taiching Palace. I stood at the gate and didn't hurry to enter. Instead, I carefully observed the place. Although the garden was simple, each flower and grass was exquisite. Moreover, the spiritual energy here was much thicker than outside. After taking a deep breath, I felt refreshed. It seemed that the two words supreme purity weren't just for show. I tidied up my clothes and walked to a building with a tightly closed door. I gently knocked on the door. "I'm Joey. I've come to keep my appointment." As soon as I finished speaking, the door opened with a squeak. I craned my neck to look inside. It was broad daylight, but the inside of the room was pitch black. My eyesight could only reach about 1 jong. At this time, there was no one in front of the door. I didn't know who had opened it. I cautiously walked in. Just like before, as soon as I entered the room, the door closed. At this time, the hall was suddenly brightly lit. I couldn't adapt to it, so I hastily closed my eyes. After a while, I came back to my senses and discovered that there was no one in the hall. Only the sound of burning candles could be heard. The three words Supreme Purity Palace were hung on the ceiling in front of me. Below the plaque was the portrait of Chuanjin Wang Chongyang. Logically speaking, Xin and Taoism were one family, and we both cultivated Tao energy. When I came to Supreme Purity Palace, I should have offered incense. However, my body didn't just have Tao energy, I also had shaman energy. After thinking about it carefully, I didn't have that thought. I had been here for a while, but I didn't see the Laoshan's hierarch. I couldn't help but feel anxious. I asked loudly, Zhou Yi, have come to keep my appointment. Please show yourself." There was no response from the hall. After a long time, I was about to speak again when a talisman flew toward me from the back of the hall. I caught it and saw that it was a sound-transmitting talisman. Then, the talisman on it began to fluctuate. Wisps of white mist slowly rose, gradually forming a few small words. "Talk in the back hall of the hall." After saying that, the small words on the sound, transmitting talisman dissipated, and it gradually returned to its original appearance. I put away the sound, transmitting talisman, and walked toward the back of the hall, suspiciously. This was a meeting hall. At this moment, there was a cup of tea placed by the big hand, and the fragrance of tea was slowly rising. However, I still didn't see the Laoshan's hierarch. Today, he was the one who invited me. No matter how good my temper was, I couldn't bear to be played like this. I was angry and said coldly, "Since I've already kept my appointment, why is Senior so rude and unwilling to meet me?" After 3 to 5 seconds, there was still no response from the inside of the room. I only felt my hand heat up. I lowered my head and saw that the sound-transmitting talisman had moved again. Words gradually appeared on it. "Little friend, don't be angry. Let's talk over tea." I smacked my lips and walked with large strides to the big hand that had already placed the tea. I sat down and picked up a teacup to drink it. Once the teacup was empty, I felt my entire body tremble. Suddenly, the scenery around me changed. At this moment, I was in a place where I couldn't even see my fingers in front of me. Logically speaking, my cultivation was close to the late stage of the Seal realm, and I should be able to move freely in the dark. However, I couldn't see anything clearly now. I couldn't help but feel nervous. I immediately spread the Tao energy in my body to guard against any sudden attacks. Just as my nerves were stretched to the extreme, a deep voice suddenly sounded around me. "Little friend, Zhou Yi, don't be alarmed. You are currently in my butterfly dream." The Taoist butterfly dream was actually an illusion. I raised the Tao energy in my body to the extreme and kept looking around. As there was an evil sacrificial spirit outside, I wasn't too afraid. After I calmed down, I asked the darkness, "Senior, you haven't appeared yet you directly attacked me. May I know what your intentions are?" "Little friend, Don't be angry. I don't have any malicious intentions. It's just that I'm still in seclusion and can't meet you. I can only use a spell to chat with you." Hearing this, I slowly relaxed. This person must be the Laozhan sect leader who had invited me. Since this was his intention, even if I was angry, I might not be able to escape from this illusion. It was better to calm down and listen to what he wanted to do so that I could have a plan. Thinking about this, I opened my mouth to ask why he had invited me here. That person coughed lightly and said, "Today, I have called you here for two matters. I know that you want to head to the East Seas Billows Mountain, but I don't have any clue. Is that right?" I paused. This old man really knew my purpose this time. He definitely knew something by calling me here. Thus, I nodded and asked, "Do you have any ideas?" Chapter 742. After hearing what he said, I was elated. It seemed that coming to Mount Lao was the right decision. However, I couldn't appear too impatient at this moment. Let's listen to what he has to say first. After thinking, I asked, "May I know what is Senior's request?" The old man coughed twice before saying, "I believe that little friend has seen Mount Lao's restriction on your way here. My request is related to it." After hearing that, I became curious. On the way here, I had heard Lu Zongqing talk about Mount Lao's restriction. According to him, this restriction was the work of the founder of Mount Lao. Although I don't know how powerful the founder was, since he was able to establish a sect, he definitely wasn't someone that I could compare to. Hearing the old man mention the restriction, could it be that there was a problem with the restriction? Thinking about that, I couldn't help but voice out my doubt and asked if there was a problem with the restriction. The old man couldn't help but laugh. "Young friend, you are indeed a genius of the present age. To be honest, even though this restriction was set up by my Mount Lao's Grandmaster, it is inevitable that there will be some wear and tear after 1,000 years. Moreover, the spiritual energy of heaven and earth is no longer the same as before. Currently, my Mount Lao's restriction is already unstable. I am ashamed that my cultivation isn't as high as the Grandmaster's. Even though I want to support it, I am powerless. So today, Little Friend has come to ask Little Friend to repair this restriction and extend my Mount Lao's 1,000 years of heritage." His words made me turn pale. Although I had reached the Heavenly Seal Master realm at a young age, my abilities were naturally extraordinary. According to my conjecture, the old man's abilities should be far above mine. Since he couldn't solve it, how could I have a solution? Immediately, I shook my head. Senior really thinks too highly of me. I really can't help you with this matter. Moreover, if Senior doesn't have a solution, how would I have a solution? Moreover, I don't understand this boundary restriction very well. It's better to find another expert. After hearing what I said, the old man didn't have a trace of impatience. He only explained, "My Mount Lao's restriction is a formation. I know that Little Friend isn't good at formations. I don't want Little Friend to set up a formation. I just want Little Friend to go to MT Billows to help me find a magic tool. This magic tool is the key to repairing the restriction." Speaking of formations, I couldn't help but think of the fatty. Back then, he had repaired my Wanwu Mountain's restrictions. I reckon that Mount Lao's formations wouldn't be too difficult for him. However, he was still in the demon purification pot, and no one knew when he would wake up. It seemed that he wouldn't be able to help with this matter, so he could only do as the old man said. Moreover, it wasn't difficult for me to find things. It was just a matter of convenience. Thinking of this, my complexion improved. Since the old man had a request, he would definitely give me the answer I wanted. Therefore, I didn't rush him. Instead, I asked him what the magic tool was. After the old man heard what I said, he was silent for a few seconds. Finally, he said, "Easter Emperor Bell." I was stunned on the spot. The Easter Emperor Bell was one of the 10 great ancient divine instruments that were on par with my Xian Yuan sword and Yao refining gourd. It was said that the bell of the Eastern Emperor possessed the power to suppress the primordial world, distort the space-time of the universe, evolve the mysteries of the heavenly Tao, and refine the earth, water, fire, and wind. The sun, moon, stars, earth, water, fire, and wind revolved around the bell. Within the bell, there were mountains, rivers, and earth, as well as thousands of primitive races. 5 colored lights illuminated the heavens, and the primal chaos, holy might, shook the universe. Infinitely mysterious, infinitely good fortune, it could freeze time and suppress space. It could reflect the damage of any treasures or divine weapons, as well as all divine spells. It was equipped with both attack and defense, and was undefeatable when placed on top of one's head. Perhaps the old man predicted that I would have such a reaction, so he explained to me, "Little friend, you don't have to be surprised. This Eastern Emperor Bell is a defensive magic tool. It's the best choice to use it to repair my Lao Mountain's restriction." What he said didn't seem to be a problem, but every ancient divine instrument was a peerless treasure that all cultivators would want to possess. I didn't believe that the old man didn't have such thoughts. If he wanted to take it for himself, it wouldn't be for the so-called repair of the restriction. Then wouldn't the item that I had painstakingly searched for be given to him? However, after thinking about it, if I didn't agree to his request, he might not tell me how to get to Lubo Mountain and might even make a move on me. Now that it looked like he was discussing with me, it would be better to say that he was making a deal. After thinking about it, I decided to agree to it first. When the fatty woke up, I would let him solve the problem of the restriction. That way, I wouldn't need the Eastern Emperor Bell. If I couldn't solve it, I would think of another way. At this moment, I already had a plan in mind, so I agreed to it. Following that, I asked how to get to Lubo Mountain. Seeing that I had agreed to it, the old man said, "To go up Lubo Mountain, go to Langya platform first." After saying that, he didn't say anything else. At this moment, my head started to buzz, and my entire body sank into a blur. When I woke up, I realized that I was sitting safely in the meeting room at the back of the main hall. In my hand was an empty teacup. The teacup was still emitting a faint fragrance. It seemed that the old man had already removed the illusion. His last sentence was unimaginable. To go up Lubo Mountain, go to Langya platform first. The meaning of the first half of the sentence was easy to understand. It was just that Langya platform sounded like a place, but I didn't know where exactly it was. I sat on the chair and calmed myself down. After saying that the old man removed the illusion, it was obvious that he didn't want to say anything more to me. If I were to question him now, I wouldn't get a reply. After thinking that, I walked out of the Tai Ching Palace and opened the palace door. At this moment, Lu Zongxing and the evil sacrificial spirit were still standing in front of the palace door. When the evil sacrificial spirit saw that I had come out, there wasn't any change in his expression, and he only nodded slightly at me. Lu Zongxing didn't say much, and only said that he would immediately bring me down the mountain. I couldn't understand the attitude of Mount Lao. Previously, they had respectfully invited me over, but now they were in such a hurry to send me off. It was reasonable to say that they had invited me up the mountain. Not to mention serving me with good food and wine, they should at least be courteous enough to show me around the scenery of Mount Lao. But now, they were in such a hurry to send me off. This made me speechless. However, I wasn't a stubborn person. Since they weren't willing to let me stay, I couldn't say much. Immediately, I brought the evil, sacrificial spirit and followed Lu Zongxing down the mountain. Along the way, we didn't talk much. After Lu Zongxing sent us down the mountain, he excused himself and said that there were many chores to take care of in the sect. Then, he hurriedly returned. Looking at his departing figure, I couldn't help but sigh and shake my head. My previous good impression of him had already disappeared. After returning to the hotel, I called Lu Ruxu out and told her about my conversation with the old man. I asked if they had any leads. When I mentioned that the old man wanted to find the Eastern Emperor Bell, Lu Ruxu's reaction was the same as before. She was extremely surprised. On the other hand, the evil sacrificial spirit still had a cold expression, as if he didn't care. It seemed that I couldn't count on him for this matter. However, after I finished speaking, the evil sacrificial spirit wore a puzzled expression. Without waiting for me to ask, he said, "After the war, I thought that the Eastern Emperor Bell had also fallen into the mountain and sea realm. I didn't expect that it would appear in Billows Mountain. I was slightly surprised and didn't think too much about it. The most important thing now was to find out what kind of place the Langya platform was and how it was related to Billows Mountain." Lu Ruxu didn't make any noise. She just lowered her head, as if she was thinking about something. I didn't have a clue and could only sit there for 100 years, waiting for him to speak. As expected, after 3 to 5 minutes, Lu Ruxu raised her head. Her eyes were filled with joy. It seemed that she had thought of something and hastily opened her mouth to ask. Then, she slowly explained the situation of the Langya platform. Actually, the Langya platform wasn't far from us. It was located in Qingdao's Huangdao district, Langya town. Previously, when I was flipping through the guidebook, it was just that at that time, all of my attention was focused on finding information about Lubo Hill, so I didn't notice it. Legend has it that the Langya platform was first built by the king of Yu, Gojian. After the king of Yu destroyed Wu, he moved the capital from Qiji to Langya in order to rule over the defeated Qi. He built the platform on Mount Langya, which is 5 kilometers southeast of the city. After Qin Shi Huang unified China, he placed the 8 gods on Mount Tai, namely the Lord of Heaven, the Lord of Earth, the Lord of War, the Lord of Yin, the Lord of Yang, the Lord of Moon, the Lord of Sun, and the Lord of the 4 Seasons. Because the Temple of the 4 Seasons was built on the Langya platform, it was called South Ascending Langya. After Qin Shi Huang arrived at Langya platform, he was attracted by the beautiful scenery of the mountains and seas. He moved 30,000 households and rebuilt Langya platform. Of course, these were only historical records and couldn't be considered anything new. There was nothing in them that I wanted. However, Lu Ruxu's following words piqued my interest. Lu Ruxu said, Langya platform is the starting point of Su Fu's journey to the east. Su Fu's journey to the east to seek immortality on the sea was already widely known. It was said that in the past, there would often be pavilions, divine mountains, and celestial beings appearing on the sea surface. The gods would come alive and disappear in a flash. Every time such a miraculous scene appeared, the common people and officials would kneel and worship. They believed that it was a divine mountain, a fairyland, a miraculous treasure land that could help Qin Shi Huang obtain the elixir of immortality. That was why Qin Shi Huang built the Langya platform and sent the alchemist Su Fu to seek the elixir of immortality. After listening to her, I started to ponder. Although in historical records, Su Fu didn't find the immortal mountain and only visited Penglai, Fenghu, and Yingzhou, the old man from Mount Lao didn't have any reason to deceive me. This Langya platform definitely had the method to reach Lubo Hill. Chapter 743. It would take around 1.5 hours to get to Langya town in Huangdao district. After we got out of the car, we didn't hurry to Langya station. Instead, we found a place to stay. If we wanted to know more about Langya station, the fastest way was to ask the locals. I had originally planned to split up with the evil, sacrificial spirit, but his unapproachable demeanor made it difficult for me to complete this task. After thinking for a while, I went out by myself and found a shabby-looking restaurant to sit down. This restaurant didn't have much business, and there weren't many customers in the hall. When the owner saw me, he came over to greet me. What do you want to eat? I picked 2 dishes and asked the owner to prepare them. I had chosen this restaurant because the other restaurants were almost bursting with visitors. I guessed I wouldn't be able to get any information from them. Soon, the owner served the dishes. He turned around and was about to leave when I called him. Do you need anything else? It's boring traveling here alone. Can you sit down and have a drink with me? We could talk about Langya Station. The owner was a little surprised. However, I guessed it was because of the business. Since he didn't have any customers, he sat down. After a few glasses of wine, he started to chat with me. From him, I learned that Langya Station had many scenic spots. The most famous one was the place where Su Fu had set off to the east. There was a stone stele there, and Su Fu had set off from that port. What followed was a long speech of irrelevant things, or things I already knew, which made me feel gloomy, and I hastily interrupted him. Then, I asked him if anything strange had happened here. Sure enough, I got something useful. According to the owner, a golden dragon had appeared on the Dragon Observatory many years ago. Then, many strange things had happened. After listening to him, I started to ponder. According to what the boss had described, I remembered the scene when we repaired the dragon vein in Shenzhen. It was almost the same. Perhaps there was a real dragon vein under the dragon observatory. The owner didn't say anything useful. I didn't want to argue with him anymore. I paid the bill and returned to the hotel. On the way there, I bought a travel guide for Langya Station. As soon as I sat down, I called Lu Ruxu. After he appeared, he bowed and greeted me, "Master." Then he asked me what I wanted. Although he regarded me as his master, I still regarded him as a senior in my heart. Sometimes he could be very useful. After I told him about the dragon viewing platform, I asked him what he thought. Lu Ruxu displayed her usual silence before telling me her thoughts. Let's not talk about whether it's a true dragon vein, but the dragon observation platform is definitely worth a trip. On the way back, I had thought about this. No matter if it was the information I had found or the conversation I had with the owner of the restaurant, besides the dragon viewing platform, there was nothing suspicious in the entire Langya Station. In that case, the way to Lubo Hill should be hidden in this viewing dragon platform. After some discussion, they decided to set off for the dragon viewing platform that night. After all, we're not here for sightseeing. Moreover, we have to choose a time when there are fewer people around. Firstly, we can't show off our abilities in front of ordinary people. Secondly, we don't want to hurt the people around us if something unexpected happens. He flipped through the guidebook a few times in the house and began to meditate, quietly waiting for the sky to turn dark. Only when it was close to dawn did we set off for the Langya Station scenic area. At this moment, the scenic area was completely dark, but it didn't affect our normal movements. Following the guidebook route in my memory, we rushed to the dragon viewing platform. Along the way, I had some doubts. If what the owner had said was true, I should have been able to feel the aura of the true dragon vein when we first stepped into the scenic area, since I was already at the Celestial Master Realm. However, as we were approaching the dragon viewing platform, why couldn't I feel the fluctuation of the true dragon vein? Could it be that there wasn't a true dragon vein here? This made me a little confused. After walking for a few more minutes, we finally reached the dragon viewing platform. The platform was connected to a row of stone steps towards the south. Standing on the steps, we could hear a very special sound. This sound made me slightly dazed. I turned to look at the evil, sacrificial spirit and saw that he was nodding at me. Although this sound was very weak, and perhaps ordinary people wouldn't be able to hear it, with my cultivation as a celestial master, it wasn't hard to distinguish that it was the roar of a dragon. It seemed that there really was a true dragon vein here, but why couldn't I feel its aura? I shook my body and put this matter to the back of my mind. When I found it, I would know. After climbing the steps, I saw a pavilion on the left that was built in the style of the Qin and Han dynasties. The plaque on the door said, "Dragon Viewing Pavilion." This pavilion was built on the cliff. When I walked into the pavilion, I could see dragons soaring and leaping. It gave me the feeling of looking down from a close distance. I could feel the aura of a dragon formation. No wonder I could hear the dragon roar here. This geomancy was really amazing. Now, I was sure that there was a dragon vein underground. However, the problem was that this place had been renovated into a scenic area. I couldn't find any hidden passages or broken mountains. I summoned Lu Ruxu and asked her to split up with the evil, sacrificial spirit to see if we had missed anything. As for me, I returned to the dragon viewing platform. It was a spacious stone platform. On the side facing the sea, there was a stone engraved with the words "Dragon Viewing Platform." I stood in front of the stone and looked at it in a daze. All of a sudden, I heard another weak dragon roar. The stone glowed with a faint yellow light. If I didn't look carefully, I wouldn't have noticed it. It seemed that I had found the entrance to the dragon vein. I mobilized the Taoist energy in my body and gathered it in my hands. Then, I gently touched the stone. At first, there was no reaction. There was no reaction at first, but after 3 to 5 seconds, the stone actually started to absorb the Tao energy in my body. Even though I was shocked, I didn't stop immediately. I wanted to see how the stone would change after absorbing the Tao energy. The stone's appetite was getting bigger and bigger. In just a few minutes, it had almost absorbed all the Tao energy in my veins. Moreover, it didn't seem to be stopping. I couldn't help but sigh at my oversight. After thinking about it, I didn't intend to withdraw from the stone. I retracted my hand and held the jade bracelet in front of my chest to absorb the dragon energy. The jade bracelet didn't only contain the half of the dragon vein from the Metaphysics Association. There was also the dragon energy that I had absorbed from Mount Wangwu. It was more than enough for my current consumption. When my hand touched the jade bracelet, the pure dragon energy flowed from my palm and started to replenish my body. At the same time, the stone suction force gradually increased. In just 10 seconds, the Tao energy in my body was completely replenished. Tong Tong seemed to have sensed the disturbance in the jade bracelet and immediately jumped out. It anxiously asked me what had happened. It was a good thing that the suction force on the stone had slowed down. It should be close to saturation, so I was able to divert my attention to tell it about the matter. Tong Tong relaxed after seeing that I was fine. He reminded me to be careful. He had consumed too much energy in Chiyo's tomb and hadn't recovered yet. If anything happened, he could immediately summon him. I nodded and went back into the jade bracelet. After Tong Tong left, the suction force on the stone was cut off. At that moment, the large stone was abnormally dazzling. There was golden Tao energy flowing on it. It was extremely impressive. The evil sacrificial spirit and Lu Ruxu, who weren't far from here, also noticed the strange phenomenon. They came in front of me one after the other. When they saw that I was sweating profusely, they looked at me with concern. I waved my hand and looked at the large stone in front of me with a burning gaze. I was shocked as I looked at it. If my jade bracelet didn't contain a large amount of dragon energy, I would have been sucked dry by this stone. It seemed this stone didn't have an ordinary origin. Even my Heavenly Seal Master's cultivation base wasn't enough for it to absorb energy. So, it had to be at the Yang spirit realm or above. Then, I thought it was reasonable. After all, many people had come to the Heavenly Seal Master's residence. If this stone was that easy to deal with, people would have found out its secret long ago. While I was pondering, the stone moved again. The golden light around it slowly moved toward the center. At first, the naked eye could still keep up with its speed, but gradually it became so fast that it could not be seen clearly. In just a few seconds, the golden light on the stone had completely disappeared. Instead, the stone shook crazily. While shaking, it let out a dragon roar. The roar became louder and louder, as if it was stimulated. Before I could react, the stone, which had recovered, shot a strong beam of light from the place where the golden light had disappeared. It hurt my eyes, and it took me a long time to recover. When I opened my eyes, the surrounding environment had changed. It wasn't the place where I had been standing. It was more like a cave. There was a faint fluctuation of dragon energy in the cave. We must have entered the place where the dragon vein was hidden through the stone. I took a deep breath and calmed myself down. I didn't hurry to find the dragon vein. Instead, I sat down to adjust my breathing. I had absorbed a large amount of dragon energy, so the Tao energy in the veins of the sky wasn't stable yet. Since there was a cave here, it must have been artificially excavated. Moreover, I was sure that this place had clues to the Lubo Mountain. If that was the case, there would inevitably be some danger. Thus, I needed to adjust my condition to the extreme to be able to deal with it. After around an hour, the Tao energy in the veins of the sky had completely stabilized. At this moment, besides the sacrificial evil spirit, there was no sign of Lu Ruxu. The three of us were sticking together, but now there were only the two of us. Could it be that he didn't follow us in? I was suspicious and turned around to ask the sacrificial evil spirit. However, I was told that after the strong light burst out, Lu Ruxu couldn't resist it and returned to Xiang Lu's pouch. After listening to him, I understood that the strong light had used up all of the Tao energy in the veins of the sky. In addition to the 1/5 of the dragon vein, I was afraid that it wouldn't be inferior to Yang Shun's celestial master's all-out attack. Lu Ruxu was a spirit, and her cultivation was greatly reduced. It was normal that she couldn't resist it. Let's not talk about him. Even if I had the power to fight against Yang Shun's celestial master, I might not be able to avoid that strong light. Chapter 744. The evil sacrificial spirit didn't answer me. He just asked me to be careful. This cave didn't look normal. I'd already noticed this. We were at the entrance. The cave wasn't more than 5 meters high. Behind us was a rock wall, and in front of us was a tunnel. This place seemed to be sealed by some secret technique. The person who could do this wasn't an ordinary person. I didn't want to waste any more time. I took the evil sacrificial spirit and headed toward the tunnel. This tunnel was long and narrow. It was a little crowded when I walked side by side with the evil sacrificial spirit. There was no dust on the ground, and it was very dry. The stone walls on both sides had traces of being dug by someone. Not only that, but I also noticed that there were some marks left by swords. I asked the evil sacrificial spirit to slow down. I took a step forward and carefully observed the sword marks. I could feel a few wisps of Tao energy. It was clear that they weren't made by ordinary swords. They were made by magic tools. I told the evil sacrificial spirit, reminding him to pay attention to the surroundings. If there was a fight here and the Tao energy on the sword marks hadn't dissipated yet, it meant that someone had been here before us. Moreover, this group of people shouldn't be underestimated. To ensure our safety, we walked forward, one in front of the other. Around 10 minutes later, we got out of the tunnel. We didn't find anything suspicious along the way. There was no path at the end of the tunnel. Even though I was a heavenly master, I couldn't see through the darkness in front of me. The place where we were standing looked like a cliff. I cautiously craned my neck to look down, but the boundless darkness swallowed my vision completely. This place was strange. I turned around and asked the evil sacrificial spirit, "What should we do now?" I saw that his face had changed. He wasn't as cold as he used to be. He had become cautious. The evil sacrificial spirit came closer and stood on the edge of the cliff. He gazed at the void in front of us, as if he was thinking about something. I didn't hurry to interrupt him. I wanted to summon Lu Ruxu. However, after calling her a few times, she didn't respond. It was strange. Was it possible that the strong light had hurt her source? At this moment, the evil sacrificial spirit saw my doubt. He explained, "There's a barrier here. The spirits have to retreat. He can't get out." His words shocked me. There was actually a restriction here? Why didn't I see it? With that thought in mind, he tried to summon Tong Tong. Unexpectedly, it was just as the evil sacrificial spirit had said. Tong Tong didn't appear by my side, even after I called him a few times. It seemed that the restrictions here were really powerful. Even an Een soul with Tong Tong's cultivation could be suppressed. Fortunately, the evil sacrificial spirit could take care of me. Although he was also a Een soul, he was different from Tong Tong and the others. The evil sacrificial spirit was now residing in a zombie's body, which was equivalent to having a physical body. Moreover, his strength was far above Tong Tong and the others, so the restrictions here were naturally useless against him. That dragon roar just now was so vivid, and the dragon breath in this place could also be clearly sensed. This meant that we might not be far from the dragon's vein. Furthermore, I had always thought that finding the dragon's vein would mean finding the way to Lubo Hill. Obviously, I didn't want to return empty-handed. After listening to me, the evil sacrificial spirit paused. He asked me to stay here while he went to check the situation. After saying that, he leaped down the cliff. My line of sight followed his figure as he gradually disappeared into the void. I stood at the edge of the cliff and stared at the position where the evil sacrificial spirit had disappeared. I didn't know how much time had passed, but I suddenly felt that the surrounding dragon breath had inexplicably become stronger. My body started to automatically absorb the dragon breath in the air. Just as I was feeling puzzled, the evil sacrificial spirit's figure suddenly appeared from the bottom of the cliff. In a split second, he steadily landed next to me. His face was obviously relaxed. Looking at his appearance, he should have a solution. Before I could open my mouth to ask, he told me that there was a spacious area below. The restriction here had been torn open by the people who had come earlier. After saying that, he beckoned me to follow him down to the spacious area. Just as my feet landed on the ground, I saw a few piles of bones not far from us. I looked up at the evil sacrificial spirit. He explained to me that these should be the people who had come earlier. However, when they broke the restriction, they suffered a backlash and lost their lives. I was slightly shocked. From the previous situation, those who could reach this place must have the cultivation of Yang God Celestial Master. However, their lives were taken by this restriction. It was really inconceivable. I didn't think that this restriction would be so powerful. However, after thinking about it, the huge rock on the dragon viewing platform could only enter this place after it had absorbed enough Tao energy. Most likely, they had used up most of their cultivation. Moreover, they had experienced a battle in the tunnel. There shouldn't be much Tao energy left in the vein of the sky. Moreover, there wasn't any dragon energy that could help them recover quickly. Moreover, they had forcefully broken the restriction, unexpectedly suffering a backlash and losing their lives in a hurry. After thinking about it clearly, I didn't delay any further. I followed behind the evil, sacrificial spirit towards the broken opening. When we passed by the bones, I found that although the bodies of the people on the ground were rotten, it wasn't hard to see from their tattered clothes that they had lived for a much longer time than we had. It seemed that someone had noticed this place a long time ago. I just didn't know if anyone had entered this place. I told the evil sacrificial spirit about my suspicions, but he said that the probability was very small. When he came down, the opening he had made was very small. He had spent a lot of effort to tear open a person's body. It didn't sound like he had said that. According to his personality, he wouldn't care about anything. I didn't think that he would have such a high evaluation of this restriction. After a few steps, I arrived at the opening he had made. As I stood there, the dragon's aura became stronger. It seemed that the change in the dragon's aura that I had felt was because the evil sacrificial spirit had made the opening bigger. The opening they had made had caused the dragon energy to seep out. If it weren't for that, I wouldn't have been able to see anything strange from the stone. It seemed that this restriction could isolate spiritual energy. As I was about to enter the restriction, the evil sacrificial spirit went in before me. After confirming that nothing had happened, he called me in. As soon as I steadied myself, I felt that the jade bracelet in front of my chest was crazily absorbing the surrounding dragon energy. Not only that, since I was already at the Celestial Master Realm, my body could also absorb the surrounding dragon energy. Pure dragon energy crazily entered my body, making my veins of heaven very close to breaking through. I steadied my mind and sat down cross-legged to stabilize the dragon energy I had just absorbed. It wasn't a good time to break through here. If I used up the Tao energy in my body now, it would be troublesome if I encountered any danger later. I slowly used the Tao energy from my veins of heaven to guide the dragon energy that was continuously entering my body. After they had calmed down, I slowly opened my eyes and looked at the scene in front of me. However, what I saw shocked me. The place we were standing in was similar to a public square. The square was inlaid with very orderly green bricks, giving off an ancient feeling. Apart from that, there was nothing else in the square. While I was feeling doubtful, the evil sacrificial spirit behind me patted my shoulder, indicating for me to look up. I followed his hand and looked up. I saw a palace-like building. The building was very grand and majestic. After taking a closer look, the entire palace was emitting a faint golden light. What surprised me the most was that the palace was built in the sky. It gave off the feeling of a celestial palace. Ever since I had become a feng shui master, I had never seen such a scene. The construction of the palace didn't conform to common sense. Of course, the matters of the Xian path couldn't be determined by common sense. From his point of view, everything was normal. I turned to look at the evil, sacrificial spirit. He still had a cold expression. He pointed at the palace above, indicating for me to wait there. After he said that, he leaped, and in a blink of an eye, he was on the corridor in front of the palace. Seeing that he was fine, I was impatient. After reaching the Celestial Master Realm, flying for a short period of time was a common method. In a few seconds, I was on the corridor and stood by his side. Standing on the corridor, I looked in the direction that I had come from. Although it wasn't far away, it was the same as when I was at the cliff. I couldn't see the outside clearly. As for the corridor in front of me, It led directly to the entrance of the palace. The structure of the place was very strange. We had to be careful with every step we took. The palace door was tightly shut. Logically speaking, every palace door should have a board to indicate the identity of the palace. However, there was nothing except for a vermilion hanging beam above the palace. The palace door was different from what I had imagined. The palace doors that I had seen in the books were more dignified and simple. However, the palace door in front of me was very simple. It could be compared to the Tai Chin Palace in Mount Lao. I shook my head and wanted to push the palace door open. However, no matter how much strength I used, it was useless. I stared at the palace door in a daze. Suddenly, I thought of the rock on the dragon viewing platform. After thinking about it, I gathered the Tao energy in my body into my hands and pushed. The palace door squeaked and started to move. However, it wasn't enough to completely open the palace door. Seeing that there was a chance, I continued to gather more Tao energy from the veins of the heavens and sent it to the palace door. Chapter 745. When the palace door opened, a golden light hit my face. I instinctively retreated and used my Tao energy to protect my body. After confirming that I wasn't hurt, I took 2 steps forward and lifted my head to look inside the palace. The scene inside the palace was naturally different from the outside. Although the furnishings were only a few square wooden boxes, there were a few vermilion pillars in the palace, and each pillar was engraved with a 3-toed golden dragon with its head held high. I didn't need to explain the symbolic meaning of the dragon. From the Shang and Zhou dynasties to the Yuan dynasty, the dragon's claws were usually 3-toed. During the Ming and Qing dynasties, the dragon's claws represented different social classes. The number of claws of a dragon was divided into 5: monarchs, 4 dukes, and 3 officials. Looking at the decorations inside the palace, it wasn't very magnificent. From the table, it seemed that this palace should be a relatively old building. In addition, we came from the Dragon Viewing Terrace, and the Langyu Terrace was built under the orders of Emperor Qin. So, this palace might have been built during that period. The evil sacrificial spirit and I exchanged looks. We didn't talk to each other and entered the palace. While walking toward the table, I remained vigilant. I stood in front of the table and didn't hurry to open the wooden box. Instead, I looked around the palace. After confirming that there was nothing strange, I slowly reached my hand to pick up the wooden box. However, when my hand touched the wooden box, I heard a faint dragon roar coming from within. Following the dragon roar, the dragon aura that I had previously absorbed into my body started to become active, causing my heaven meridians to become slightly unstable. Fortunately, the dragon roar only lasted for a few seconds before it quieted down. The dragon energy in my body also calmed down. I was curious about the item inside the wooden box. From the dragon roar, I guessed there was a dragon's vein inside. Or the dragon's vein was sealed inside something. I paused and slowly opened the wooden box. The item inside made my eyes light up. Inside the wooden box was a 4CUN wide seal with 5 dragons engraved on it. I carefully held the seal in my hand and observed its structure. Except for the 5 dragons, there was nothing special about the seal. However, there were 8 small seal characters carved at the bottom. I had to study them for a long time before I could recognize them. Receive the mandate of the heavens. Live forever. At this point, my heart thumped. Seal, trust, authority. Since ancient times, seals have been the symbol of power and status, the embodiment of responsibility and credibility, and it was also the beloved object of scholars and refined scholars. Usually, high officials and nobles would have their own seals. However, this seal that was engraved with the words, "Receive the mandate of the heavens, live forever and prosper," was not something that an ordinary noble could possess. According to historical records, the person who carved these words on the seal was Li Si of the Qin dynasty. The owner of this seal was none other than the ancestral dragon, Qin Shi Huang. This seal was also known as the imperial seal. The imperial seal of the empire was passed down from generation to generation of emperors in China. It was engraved under the orders of Qin Shi Huang. It was regarded as the symbol of the dynasty's legitimacy. It had a circumference of 4 cun. The top button was crossed with 5 dragons, and the front was engraved with 8 seal characters written by Li Si. Receive the mandate of the heavens. Live forever and prosper. It was used as a token of divine imperial power, legitimate and legitimate. From then on, the emperors of the past would treat this seal as a symbol and treat it as a rare treasure. It was an important tool of the country. If it was obtained, it symbolized that the emperor was received the mandate of the heavens, and if it was lost, it meant that the emperor's fate had come to an end. Those who ascended the throne without this seal were ridiculed as white emperor, showing that they lacked confidence and were looked down upon by the people. Because of this, those who wanted the treasure fought with each other, causing the imperial seal of the empire to change owners many times. It was passed around Qi County in China for more than 2,000 years, appearing and disappearing, and finally disappeared without a trace. Although the imperial seal of the empire had been missing for a long time, the seal in my hand matched the one in the ancient book. I couldn't tell if it was real or fake, but I still found it hard to believe. However, there was another saying. It was said that in 219 BC, when Qin Shi Huang was patrolling south to Dongting Lake, the waves suddenly rose and the boat he was on was about to sink. Qin Shi Huang threw the imperial seal into the lake and prayed to the gods to suppress the waves. 8 years later, when he was on his way to Huayi's peaceful and soothing path, someone was standing in the middle of the path with a jade seal in his hand. The person said to Qin Shi Huang's attendant, "Please return this jade seal to the ancestral dragon, Qin Shi Huang." Then, the imperial seal returned to Qin. If the imperial seal of the empire had been replaced by the Huayin Pingshu Road, it made sense. Otherwise, the Qin dynasty wouldn't have lasted for only 15 years. However, I didn't know how it ended up here. As for the imperial heirloom seal in my hand, I could clearly feel a dragon's breath within it. This confirmed my previous thoughts. Perhaps the imperial seal in my hand was the one that belonged to Qin Shi Huang, and there was a dragon's vein sealed inside. The evil sacrificial spirit saw that I was dumbfounded and was puzzled. "What's the matter?" I told him what I was thinking. After listening to me, he didn't sigh with emotion like I did. He was a man from the barbarian world, so he didn't know what the item in my hand meant. Then, I put the imperial seal back into the wooden box. However, I saw a white silk-like item at the bottom of the box. My attention was focused on the imperial seal, so I didn't notice that there was something else inside. Then I took it out. It felt silky and smooth, and it reminded me of the silk manuscript from the Warring States period that I had read in the history books. These silk manuscripts were also called silk manuscripts, and they were written with white silk. Since they were made of a special and precious material, they were often used to write important messages. I hurried to unfold it. However, besides a faint seal, there were no words on the 2-foot-long silk manuscripts. I held the imperial seal in one hand and opened the silk manuscripts with the other. Looking at the seal on the manuscripts, an idea popped into my head. He immediately pressed the heirloom seal into the position of the seal. However, there was no reaction after a few tries. This puzzled me. If the silk manuscripts were placed together with the imperial seal, there should be a connection between them. Why didn't it react? Did I have to use some special method? After thinking about it, I tried to channel my Tao energy into the imperial seal. Finally, there was a reaction. However, it wasn't the silk scroll that reacted. Instead, it was the imperial seal that emitted a dragon's roar. It then emitted a faint golden light. I suppressed the fluctuations in my body and didn't dare to relax. While I was channeling more energy into the imperial seal, I stared at the changes in the imperial seal. Gradually, the golden light around the imperial seal became stronger. I didn't dare to look at it directly. Half of the energy in my body had been drained, and the scene in front of me was completely covered by the golden light. I heard the dragon roar again. This time, it was deafening, as if a giant dragon was roaring in my ears. After a while, the dragon roar stopped, and the golden light around me dispersed. When I opened my eyes, I saw rows of small golden characters in the air. They were written in a Xiaozhuan script, so I couldn't read them all. I could only vaguely understand them. It seemed to be describing Su Fu's journey to the east. I didn't pay attention to some of the scattered details, but focused on the time and route he took and what happened along the way. At the end of the description, there was a name of a place, which was Lubo Hill. Seeing this, I couldn't help but feel happy. But at this moment, the small words in the air suddenly dissipated, disappearing in an instant. Right after that, there was another cracking sound. The imperial seal in my hand also broke. A sudden gust of wind came from outside the palace, heading towards us. The gust seemed to have an unstoppable force, and it swept us into the air. As we were sucked in, my consciousness slowly became blurry. I was woken up by the evil, sacrificial spirit. When I woke up, I found that we were standing in front of the dragon viewing platform. I looked at the evil, sacrificial spirit and wanted to ask him what was going on. However, he looked normal and shook his head at me. Everything that had happened just now was too strange. It felt like I had entered the old man's dream on Mount Lao. Fortunately, I had gotten the answer I wanted. As I was about to leave, I found that the stone in front of me had many cracks. I paused for a moment, then placed the Tao energy in my hand on the stone. The scene from before didn't appear on the stone again. It seemed that everything here had turned into ruins along with the disappearance of the small characters. It was a pity that the imperial seal was gone. The dragon roar that resounded across the heaven and earth had probably alerted the people from the Metaphysics Association. I couldn't stay here for long. Thinking about this, I brought the evil sacrificial spirit back to the guest house. As I laid on the bed, I kept thinking about what the small characters had described. From it, I found out that Su Fu's first voyage was on the 19th of the 10th month of the lunar calendar. It didn't have much value as it was just an ordinary auspicious day. The place where they set off was indeed the Langya platform as recorded in the history books. However, they had sailed on the sea for a few months. It wasn't as recorded in the ancient books, as they had found nothing. They had indeed found a celestial mountain. However, the celestial mountain wasn't the 3 sacred mountains that they had expected. It was the Billows Mountain that I had been urgently searching for. Even though we had found the Billows Mountain, Su Fu was a necromancer, which was the so-called Taoist priest. He cultivated Tao Qi. The Billows Mountain seemed to have a barrier that prevented ordinary people or people who cultivated Tao Qi from reaching it. After loitering around for a few days, Su Fu could only return empty-handed. The only noteworthy thing in the entire passage was that before the Billows Mountain appeared, there was a Didong on the sea. The Didong was in the east, and nobody dared to point it. This Didong was referring to the rainbow. From the passage, I found out that after passing through the Didong, the entrance to the Billows Mountain would appear. Chapter 746. Although it was just a small clue, it was better than nothing. At least, I had a general direction and a target to search for. I called the evil priest spirit to discuss how to set off. In the end, we decided to start the operation tomorrow night. I thought that it was time to go to sea, and taking a fishing boat was the safest way. Moreover, this operation would be very dangerous, and renting a fishing boat wouldn't be a good idea. It would arouse suspicion. The next day, I walked along the coastline for the whole morning until I found a fishing boat that could go far out to sea. I bought it. After everything was ready, I took the evil priest spirit to the place where I had hidden the fishing boat. Then, I drove the fishing boat to Langya Station. Since I had never touched a fishing boat before, I felt a little awkward driving it. Fortunately, I had a good comprehension ability. After driving for a short distance, I was able to control the boat. When we arrived at Langya Station, I was bewildered. I didn't know which direction to go since I didn't know the exact route. However, I couldn't delay any longer. I could feel the fluctuations of Tao energy behind me. Moreover, there were a lot of people. It seemed the people from a metaphysics society were here. I couldn't stay here for long. Then I started the fishing boat and headed east. As the fishing boat moved further away from the coastline, I couldn't feel the fluctuations of Tao energy anymore. I relaxed and set the fishing boat on autopilot. Then I brought the evil priest spirit to the deck. Looking at the deep sea and listening to the rumbling of the engine, I felt really comfortable. I turned to look at the evil priest spirit. He was still expressionless, but his eyes kept moving as if he was thinking about something. I asked him about it. He turned to me and looked at me blankly. Then he sat on the deck and began to tell me about the time before the war. He and his tribesmen had hunted sea sharks in the East Sea. As he spoke, his expression gradually turned from cold to gentle. It could be seen that he was extremely happy during that period of time. Then the style of the story changed, and the story jumped to the battle with the Yellow Emperor. At this point, his face instantly turned cold. I sat next to him and could feel the murderous aura in his eyes. After he finished telling the story, he turned to look at me. His eyes had an indescribable feeling. His throat moved, but he didn't say anything. Actually, even if he didn't say it, I knew what he meant. Although I haven't seen it with my own eyes, I can imagine how fierce that battle must have been. Perhaps he wanted to tell me to grow up quickly, but because I was his subordinate, it was difficult for him to say such words. Thinking to this point, I patted his shoulder and turned around to enter the cabin. I took out a box of wine that I had prepared earlier. While drinking with him, I told him about my journey. I had never told anyone about this before. Perhaps the sacrificial spirit's words had infected me, or perhaps it was because I felt a little lonely on this vast sea. I didn't know how much alcohol I drank. When I woke up the next day, I was lying on the deck with the evil sacrificial spirit sitting next to me. At this time, the sun had already risen. We had already been sailing at sea for nearly 12 hours. Calculating the distance, we were about to reach the open sea. I sat up and circulated the Tao energy in my body to get rid of the pain in my head. Since they were almost at the border, they could not afford to be careless. It would be troublesome if they were discovered. Thinking about this, I asked the evil sacrificial spirit to mobilize the shaman energy in my body to cover the entire fishing boat. The shaman energy created a green barrier around the fishing boat. This barrier was similar to the deep sea. From the outside, we couldn't see the fishing boat. Then, I returned to the cabin and accelerated the fishing boat. When we reached the open sea, I returned to the deck. According to our calculations, Bion would only appear during the day. Although I didn't know the specific conditions from now on, we couldn't relax for even a second. I waved my hand to remove the barrier around the fishing boat. Then, I asked the evil sacrificial spirit to pay attention to the situation on the sea. For the entire morning, the sea was calm and tranquil. It wasn't until the afternoon that something strange happened. The sky, which was originally clear for thousands of miles, was gradually filled with black clouds. At this moment, the sea had changed. A strong wind started to blow, and the waves shook the fishing boat. The weather at sea was unpredictable, so it did not alert us. On the contrary, we stared fixedly at the black cloud that was still expanding. Around 10 minutes later, the wind and waves became stronger. We couldn't control the fishing boat anymore. The entire sky was shrouded in dark clouds, which looked like they were about to crush the city. I turned around and reminded the evil sacrificial spirit, "Be careful. That dark cloud looks strange." Before the evil sacrificial spirit could finish his words, a water column shot out from the place where the dark cloud had risen. That water column seemed to connect to the sky in the center of the dark cloud. Not only that, but the waves rose one more time. The damaged fishing boat couldn't resist it anymore. It began to crack. I immediately soared into the sky with the evil sacrificial spirit. As soon as our feet left the deck, the fishing boat cracked from the middle. In just a blink of an eye, it sank to the seabed. But it wasn't over yet. There was only one water column in the center of the dark cloud. While we were bewildered, two more water columns rose. The three water columns spun at the same time, stirring up a massive whirlpool where the water column had risen. The surrounding seawater constantly gathered towards the whirlpool. The evil sacrificial spirit and I looked at each other, then flew towards the whirlpool. According to my thoughts, I hadn't read the entire text in the Silk Scroll. I only understood that there was a strange phenomenon on the sea. Now that we were facing the same situation, perhaps this strange phenomenon could lead us to the location of the Billows Mountain. Unexpectedly, before we could get close to the whirlpool, the three water columns started to stir even more violently. The surrounding seawater was constantly sucked into the water columns. Not only that, but as the water columns sped up, the airflow became unstable. At this moment, we couldn't stabilize our bodies. Although we could fly, we couldn't control the surrounding airflow. Even the evil, sacrificial spirit couldn't do that. I couldn't help but panic. At this moment, my body could only follow the flow of the air, swaying as I pleased. If this continued, we wouldn't be able to hold on for long before we were sucked into the water columns like the seawater. I turned to look at the evil, sacrificial spirit and saw that his face was gloomy. His eyes were rolling as though he was thinking. I became anxious as the Taoist chi in my body couldn't hold on for long. I quickly asked him if he had any countermeasures. He smacked his lips and said that he couldn't think of anything at the moment. He could only use brute force to see if he could break the water columns. Upon saying that, his aura surged and he charged into one of the water columns. Seeing his actions, I naturally couldn't fall behind. I activated all the Taoist chi in the veins of the sky and prepared to charge over. However, before I could reach it, the evil sacrificial spirit flew back and told me that there seemed to be something in the whirlpool. It was just that it was blocked by a layer of mist. I couldn't see it clearly and couldn't enter it. Immediately after, he asked me if I had any sharp weapons that could cut open the mist. Sharp weapons? I suddenly remembered that I had two swords on me. One was the armor-removing sword, and the other was the Xianyuan sword. After thinking about it, I took out the armor-removing sword from my Xianglu bag and handed it to him. However, he didn't intend to receive the sword. He shook his head at me and said, "This sword can't be controlled by the shaman energy. It's better for you to control it." I nodded and followed the evil, sacrificial spirit, heading toward the mist. Standing above the mist, I wasn't in a hurry to make a move. Instead, I first observed. The mist was dark green, and I could faintly see that there was something long inside. The evil sacrificial spirit didn't say anything when he saw that I wasn't moving. He just tried his best to help me control my position. I saw that he was already struggling. Without saying anything, I raised the armor-removing sword and slashed at the mist. With a clang, the armor-removing sword in my hand started to tremble violently. The web between my thumb and forefinger split open and blood seeped out. However, the mist below wasn't damaged at all. Not only was I stunned, but I also felt that it was unbelievable. Use the king's sword. At this moment, a voice resounded from the armor-removing sword. After hearing that, I calmed down and took out the Xianyuan sword from my body. I once again activated the Taoist chi in my body and swung it. The Xianyuan sword shone with a golden light and charged towards the mist. With another clang, the mist was broken. Not only that, but the surrounding seawater was also separated into two shores by the Xianyuan sword energy. The dark clouds in the sky were forcefully sliced open, and sunlight shone through the gap, shining on our bodies. At that moment, the pressure on our bodies was completely gone. The evil sacrificial spirit standing behind me didn't enjoy it as much as I did. He patted my shoulder and asked me to pay attention to the area below. I lifted my head and saw that the mist had turned into a rainbow under the sunlight. I couldn't help but be elated. I immediately called the evil, sacrificial spirit to fly towards the rainbow. As we flew, I pushed the shining mist aside. I then realized that there was a grassland below the rainbow. In the middle of the grassland, there was a stone tablet. Standing in front of the stone tablet, I examined the engraved pattern. It looked like some kind of writing. Even though I had come into contact with many ancient writings, I didn't recognize these few words. Just as I was about to ask the evil sacrificial spirit, he walked forward and stared at the stone tablet. He spat out 3 words, Billows Mountain. Chapter 747. Previously, I had read from the Silk Scroll that any ordinary person or cultivator of Dao Qi were unable to enter Lubo Mountain. From this, it seemed that Lubo Mountain should have something similar to a barrier. Since ordinary people couldn't enter, it meant that only cultivators could open the door to Lubo Mountain. Since I couldn't use Dao Qi, I could only use shaman energy. Thinking about it, I mobilized the shaman energy in my body and gathered on my hands. Then, I gently pressed on the stone tablet. As expected, there was a reaction from the stone tablet. The stone tablet first shook violently, then it started to split from the center. The entire stone tablet started to split into two, like two doors. As the stone tablet slowly opened, a dark green barrier appeared in front of us. It looked strange and deep. I carefully extended my hand to the barrier, only to discover that my finger had actually passed through it. I was elated and nodded at the sacrificial evil spirit before passing through the barrier. After we had passed through, the barrier behind us disappeared. I was surprised by the scene in front of me. We were standing on a huge reef. Not far from us was an extremely large island. The island was lush and verdant, making it impossible to see the situation inside. I glanced at the sacrificial evil spirit, only to discover that he had his eyes closed, his face showing an indescribable expression of enjoyment. I heard him muttering to himself, "This aura, desolate, so nostalgic." I didn't disturb him. Lubo Mountain originally existed at the same time as the sacrificial evil spirit. It's just that I don't know who sealed this place. Thus it was preserved after a few thousand years of great changes. At this moment, the sacrificial evil spirit's expression reminded me of the past. After standing at the same spot for a long time, he opened his eyes and realized that I was staring at him. His face immediately returned to its previous cold expression. I shook my head and beckoned him to fly towards the island. But halfway through, the sacrificial evil spirit stood in front of me, blocking my path. He made me wary of the sea below, as there might be danger. After hearing what he said, I quickly looked down. The seawater below was so clear that I could see the bottom. It didn't look like there was any danger. Just as I was about to ask him to continue our journey, the seawater suddenly changed. The originally azure blue seawater had turned dark green. Not only that, there were bubbles constantly appearing in the water as though it was boiling. I gripped the Xian Yuan sword tightly in case something suddenly popped up from the water. The evil sacrificial spirit stood shoulder to shoulder with me, his bright eyes gazing at the water below. In the blink of an eye, I saw a huge figure moving under the water. At this moment, the evil sacrificial spirit roared and retreated, bringing me with him. At the same time, the thing at the bottom of the sea finally broke the surface. The dark green seawater splashed everywhere, drenching us. The thing in front of them was dozens of meters tall, with two long ears on its huge head. It looked like a rabbit. The dark green fur all over its body seemed indestructible, and its claws had 5 long toes. Each toe was long and reflected light, looking extremely sharp. It was very strange, and I didn't know what it was. Since it existed in Lubo Hill, it must be a monster from the Desolate era. Initially, he wanted to ask the sacrificial evil spirit if it knew about it. Unexpectedly, before I could ask, the monster stretched its claws and swung them at us. Even though its body was huge, its movements were very nimble. Moreover, when it swung its claws, it seemed to have the power to tear the space apart. A gust of wind blew towards me, scaring me so much that I didn't dare to take it head-on and could only retreat. Seeing that I had dodged, the monster didn't chase after me, but pounced towards the evil sacrificial spirit. Seeing that the claws were about to reach him, the evil sacrificial spirit still didn't react. My heart tightened, and I wanted to warn him. Unexpectedly, the evil sacrificial spirit's body moved and actually met the claws head-on, throwing a punch at it. The monster staggered from the evil sacrificial spirit's punch. Seeing that, I heaved a long sigh of relief. It seemed that I was overly worried. With the evil sacrificial spirit's power, this thing wasn't enough. After saying that, I landed on the reef. Previously, when I was breaking through the mist, the Tao energy in my body was already exhausted. Afterwards, I had to rely on the shaman energy in my body to fly. Otherwise, it would have been difficult to reach Lubo Hill. After thinking that, I absorbed the dragon energy from the jade bracelet to recover my strength while observing the battle situation. Originally, I thought that the evil sacrificial spirit would be able to deal with the monster easily. I didn't expect that the monster wouldn't fall even after such a long time. Not only that, but it gave me the illusion that it was getting stronger as it fought. After fighting for a few more minutes, the monster seemed to be exhausted, and its movements gradually slowed down. At this moment, the evil sacrificial spirit took the opportunity to launch an even more ferocious attack. Step by step, it forced the monster to be unable to retaliate. Finally, the evil sacrificial spirit ferociously kicked it away, and it fell heavily into the sea. It created a huge wave, and I almost fell off the reef. The evil sacrificial spirit didn't intend to stop there. Instead, it rapidly dashed in the direction of the monster, preparing to give it the final blow. Seeing that, the Tao energy in my body was already full, and I prepared to get up and meet up with the evil sacrificial spirit. Unexpectedly, just as I stood up, a black object fiercely smashed towards me. Its speed was so fast that I didn't have time to dodge, and I was already hit flying backwards. I didn't know how far I flew, but I felt a burst of pain in my chest and back. In theory, I was a heavenly seal master, and my body should be tougher than ordinary people. I didn't expect that I would feel so uncomfortable after being hit like that. It seemed this force couldn't be underestimated. I pushed the heavy object on my body and found that it was soft. I hurried to open my eyes and saw that the evil sacrificial spirit was on top of me. At this moment, the evil sacrificial spirit also looked uncomfortable. Seeing that I was under his body, he was startled and got up to make way. I couldn't believe it. I had never seen an evil sacrificial spirit suffer. I immediately asked him what was going on. The evil sacrificial spirit turned around, not daring to look at me. He lowered his voice and explained the situation. Although the evil sacrificial spirit was from the Age of Desolation, he was killed by the Yellow Emperor after his defeat, and his soul was sent to the 9 Serenities to suffer. After losing his body, the evil sacrificial spirit's power was greatly reduced. Moreover, his soul wasn't complete, so he only had half of his original power. Moreover, he had used a lot of his strength to help me resist the turbulence outside. Although the evil sacrificial spirit with only half of his original power was much stronger than the current cultivators, he had underestimated the monster from the Age of Desolation and was struck down. After listening to him, I gently patted his shoulder. I wanted to apologize, but I swallowed the words. In the eyes of the evil sacrificial spirit, I was his master. If I apologized to him, wouldn't it be worse than killing him? After thinking about it, I stood up and asked him what that monster was and how it could have such power. He shook his head, indicating that he had never seen it before. I was puzzled. He was also from the Age of Desolation, so how could he not have seen this monster? However, after thinking about it, this Billows Mountain might have been sealed in the Age of Desolation, so it was reasonable that he hadn't seen it before. While I was talking, there was movement in the sea. The monster that had fallen stood up again. However, its body was badly mutilated, and there wasn't a single part of its body that was intact. It seemed that it wasn't that the evil sacrificial spirit wasn't its match, but that his last attack had pushed the monster to its limit. That was why the careless, evil, sacrificial spirit had been hit. I looked at the evil, sacrificial spirit. He seemed to understand my intention. He nodded slightly and stood up, gazing at the monster that was approaching us. The monster's eyes were sharp. Seeing that we were unharmed, it couldn't help but be enraged and roared at the sky. His roar was deafening, like a dragon's roar. I quickly covered my ears and stood rooted to the ground, my face filled with disbelief. Before I could react, the monster shot a green fireball from its mouth. It seemed that its power wasn't small. The fireball headed straight for us. At this moment, the evil sacrificial spirit reacted one step ahead of me. He pulled me to the other side of the sky to dodge. With a loud bang, the fireball smashed into the rock that we had been standing on. The reef was instantly vaporized, and even the surrounding seawater was evaporated. After seeing this, I thought that the fireball's power wasn't inferior to the blue dragon flame that the snake spirit had spat out. With this thought, I had an idea. I was ready to summon the snake spirit. That fellow had rest enough on my back. It was time for him to show his strength. As soon as the snake spirit came out, he looked as if he deserved a beating. He rubbed his eyes and said to me, "Kid, why did you call your master dragon? Did you know that I was sleeping soundly when you woke me up?" I patted his head and said with a smile, "I have something good for you to eat." Then I pointed at the 10-meter-tall monster in front of us. I thought that the monster's power wasn't ordinary, and its hair was really tough. If the snake spirit could eat its body, its power would increase greatly. However, I didn't expect that after I said that, the snake spirit's face paled. He hid behind me and shivered. While hiding, he said, "Why does this thing look so much like a hoe?" After hearing that, I was stunned. I glanced at the snake spirit, then looked at the monster and carefully examined it. Before I could see it clearly, the monster had already made its move. Looking at it now, it really did look like a hoe. Although that was the case, I was absolutely certain that it wasn't a hoe. A hoe was shaped like a rabbit. Its ears were long and pointed, and it was only a foot long. A lion was afraid of it, and its body would rot if it was drowned. The snake spirit was afraid because it really thought that this thing was a hoe. It was said that although a hoe's body was small, it could still fight against a dragon. However, the huge monster in front of us, besides its head, was completely different from the hoe recorded in the ancient books. Moreover, a hoe was a monster that only appeared during the Ming and Qing dynasties. Why would it appear in the Wild Billows Mountain? Chapter 748. At this moment, I didn't have time to care about the snake spirit, because the monster was heading toward us. The evil sacrificial spirit next to me gazed at my back, which gave me goosebumps. As the monster was approaching, I prepared to use my Tao energy to wield the Xianyuan sword. Unexpectedly, the Tao energy in the veins of the sky didn't move, and the Xianyuan sword didn't change, either. I found it strange. At the same time, the evil sacrificial spirit exhaled. His shaman energy covered his body as he dashed toward the monster. Soon, he reached the monster. This time, he didn't underestimate the enemy like before. Each of his attacks was fierce. Even Yang God, Heavenly Master, couldn't resist his attacks. As the evil sacrificial spirit punched out one last time, the monster let out a muffled sound as its back was blown up. It stood motionless in the sea for a long time. Eventually, a bird chirped and the monster collapsed. The seawater had completely submerged it. At this moment, there was no more commotion on the sea surface, and the seawater returned to its blue color. I flew over and stood next to the evil, sacrificial spirit. "How are you doing?" I asked him. He shook his head. "I'm fine." Then, we flew toward the island. We didn't hurry to land on the island. Instead, we flew up and hovered above the island. There was only one mountain range on the island. However, this mountain range stretched for dozens of miles. It was lush and green, which covered the entire mountain. It was impossible to find the Kauai immediately. Then, I took the evil sacrificial spirit and found a place to land. Then, we headed toward the mountain. While we were on our way, I asked him why he couldn't use his Tao energy. He told me that this was a barren land where Tao energy didn't exist. Otherwise, cultivators who cultivated Tao energy would have been able to come here. After listening to him, I nodded and recalled the scene in front of the stone tablet. It made sense. Then, I asked him why he looked at my back with a strange expression. This time, the evil sacrificial spirit gave me a vague answer. When the snake spirit appeared, it had a familiar power. I shook my head. I couldn't figure out what the problem was, so I decided to leave it at the back of my mind. We kept moving forward. After a few miles, I suddenly felt something strange in Xiang Lu's bag. I asked the evil sacrificial spirit to stop. Then, I took out all the items from the Xiang Lu bag and placed them on the ground to check. Finally, his eyes locked onto the demon purification pot, which was emitting white smoke as if something was being burned. The evil sacrificial spirit told me that something inside was about to come out. The first person I thought of was Fatty. Could it be that Fatty had woken up? Thinking about this, I couldn't help but call out to Fatty. Right after I said that, Fatty's figure appeared in front of me. He laid on the ground and rubbed his flesh. Noticing my gaze, he stood up and gave me a bear hug. I was suffocated by his huge body. Only then did he react and let go of me. Then he began to ask how long he had been unconscious and what had happened during that period. I gestured for him to calm down and told him everything that had happened recently. When he heard that I had buried Wu Yu and his wife together, he couldn't help but sigh. Then, he didn't say anything else. He looked around and asked me where we were. I told him the purpose of our trip. He gave me a slight nod. His face didn't change much as he swaggered forward. Seeing him like that, I heaved a sigh of relief. I remembered what the evil sacrificial spirit had told me. It seemed the Fatty had fully recovered. I put the items on the ground back into the Xiang Lu bag and returned the demon purification pot to the Fatty. Then, I continued my journey. While walking, the Fatty stopped and gazed at the sky above the forest. I didn't know what he was looking at. When I asked him about it, he told me about it. The trees in this forest were so big that they could even cover the sky. However, there were always one or two places where the branches and leaves couldn't reach. Strangely enough, no sunlight could penetrate through. At first, I didn't understand what the Fatty meant. After he explained it to me, I understood. Although this place was shaded from the sun, the light was just a little dim. It didn't affect our vision. Because of this, we didn't notice that the sky above the island was cloudless, but there was no sun. It was as if we were inside a lamp. The surroundings were bright, but we couldn't see the source of the light. When we were outside the island, we were busy dealing with that monster, so we didn't notice it. Now that I thought about it, it was really strange. Then, I instinctively turned to look at the evil, sacrificial spirit. I wanted to get an answer from him. However, he looked puzzled. It seemed he didn't know anything about this. I gave him a slight nod. This place was the savage, desolate antiquity land, and it was located in the sea. There must be something strange about it. I told the Fatty what I was thinking and asked him not to worry about it. We should continue our journey. After Fatty heard this, he nodded silently and hurried on with his journey. However, he didn't stop talking. He kept muttering something. But before he could take a few steps, the sky suddenly darkened, and a few stars appeared in the sky. Strangely enough, these stars were moving at a speed visible to the naked eye. Before I could react, I heard the Fatty shout from behind, "Not good. 9 temples shift." I knew about the 9 temples that the Fatty mentioned. The 9 temples were divided into Qian Temple, Qin Temple, Jin Temple, Zhen Temple, Central Temple, Sun Temple, Li Temple, Kuan Temple, and Dui Temple. At night, we could observe the movement of the 7 planets and the constellations in the sky. The movement of the constellations was a normal thing, but I didn't know why the Fatty had such a reaction. As I was about to ask him about it, I didn't expect that before I could say anything, the surrounding plants and trees started to move as if they had limbs. Not only that, but the ground we were standing on also started to move. At this moment, we didn't dare to act rashly. We just carefully observed the changes in our surroundings. Fortunately, this change only lasted for about 10 seconds before it stopped. The Fatty's bright eyes gazed at the constellations in the sky. His eyes kept moving as if he was thinking about something. I walked over and asked what happened. He didn't answer me immediately. 3 to 5 seconds later, he retracted his gaze and turned to look at me. There should be a great formation here. As long as the starlight moves, everything on the island will move accordingly. I didn't know much about formations. However, the Fatty had been with me for a long time, so I had learned a lot about formations. However, I had never heard of a formation that could change the trajectory of the starlight. Then, I asked the Fatty if there was a way to solve it. Unexpectedly, he didn't know much about formations either. He said that he had read about it in an old book in his sect. However, there were only a few words about it, and there was no way to solve it. I didn't pay much attention to it. Although there was a formation here, it didn't conflict with our goal. We just needed to find the Kuei cow and the Easter Emperor bell and leave this place as soon as possible. Just as I was about to ask everyone to hurry up, the surrounding scenery started to change again. I subconsciously raised my head to look at the sky. The starlights were constantly changing their positions. This time, their speed was much faster than before. I was startled. I had a strange feeling that something unexpected would happen this time. Just as I thought about that, the fatty behind me shouted. I turned around to look. Originally, there wasn't much distance between me and the fatty, but now the ground had started to split in the middle of us and was quickly moving to both sides. Seeing that the ground was moving faster and faster, the fatty's shout became louder. What's going on? Why can't I use my Tao energy? The last time the 9 palaces had shifted, it had only lasted for a short time. I didn't know how long it would last this time. I knew that if I stood there without moving and waited for the 9 palaces to stop, I would be sitting and waiting for death. If I didn't save the fatty, I didn't know where he would be taken to. Thinking about that, I prepared to use the shaman energy in my body to jump to the fatty's side. However, I didn't expect that I wouldn't feel any shaman energy in my body. I paled and turned to look at the evil, sacrificial spirit. He was quickly moving backward. Perhaps it was because he had realized that he couldn't use his shaman energy that he had never seen before. Seeing the fatty move further and further away from me, I was worried. However, I couldn't think of a solution. At that moment, I saw the evil sacrificial spirit arching his body and preparing to jump to my side. I didn't dare to let him come like that. I hurried to stop him. I had observed the ground when it was moving. It didn't look like the surface of the ground was cracking. It was more like the entire Earth's crust was moving. The bottom of the fault was pitch black, and I couldn't see the bottom. If he could jump to the other side, it would be fine. However, if he couldn't, he would fall into the crack. I didn't know what kind of danger he would face. The evil sacrificial spirit didn't say anything as I had interrupted him. However, his face became more solemn. I turned my head and continued to look around. As the ground moved faster, the two of them quickly disappeared into the darkness. After a long time, the starlight in the sky stopped. During this process, the ground in other places had moved back to the place where the crack had been. The entire ground had returned to its original state. I exhaled in relief and sat cross-legged on the ground. My fingers unconsciously moved around. This time, the 9 palaces had shifted for a long time. Moreover, the ground had changed a lot. I didn't know what would happen next time. I had planned to wait for the fatty and the others to come. However, as I was moving my fingers, I suddenly remembered something. What we had just experienced was similar to the jigsaw puzzle I had played when I was a kid. In this game, the entire puzzle was disrupted. Only one piece could be moved at a time, and the position of each piece wouldn't repeat. Chapter 749. I patted my body and stood up. Although I didn't know when the 9 temples would shift again, I couldn't just wait here. I had to go up the mountain as soon as possible. Perhaps I could find the Kauai cow sooner. After walking for about 2 hours, the 9 temple shift was triggered 3 times. After that, the sky returned to its original state, and the forest became brighter. I closed my eyes and tried to sense the shaman energy in my body. However, I was disappointed. My body was still empty, and I didn't feel any energy. I tried to call the eyes and the snake spirit, but they didn't respond. It seemed this place really forbade all kinds of powers. It was really powerful. I couldn't help but think that if I found the Kauai cow, I would be helpless. Anyway, I had no other choice but to hurry. When I reached a patch of grass that was half the height of a human, I suddenly heard some noises in front of me. The noise was strange. Ever since we had arrived on the island, we had never encountered such a situation. I stopped and carefully crouched in the grass. Since I had lost all my powers, I couldn't be careless. I slowly moved toward the source of the noise. The source of the noise was getting closer and closer to me. I gently brushed the grass in front of me aside, revealing only the gap between my eyes. Not far from me were some monsters with human bodies and deer heads. They were chewing the bones and meat of some animals, and a person was lying next to them. Although that person's back was facing me, I could tell it was the fatty. He was tied with a rope, and he was lying on the ground, not moving an inch. When I saw this, I felt my head heat up. As I was about to rush out, someone hugged me. Instinctively, I turned around and saw that the evil sacrificial spirit had appeared behind me. At this moment, I wasn't in the mood to enjoy our reunion. I wanted to save the fatty. I wiggled my body and tried to move forward. When the evil sacrificial spirit saw that I was so excited, he said, "Don't panic." He wasn't killed. He just fainted. His words couldn't calm me down. The fatty and I had grown up together, and we were like brothers. Moreover, we had been through life and death together for years. We were brothers. Now that he was in danger, how could I just sit and watch? I didn't listen to the evil sacrificial spirit's advice and wanted to rush forward. Before I could take a step forward, the evil sacrificial spirit's words stunned me. "They're the Kuei cows." This news was somewhat inconceivable to me. I turned and looked at the sacrificial spirit. He nodded and repeated his words. I couldn't help but feel happy. However, I also felt strange. According to ancient records, the Kuei ox was as strong as an ox. It had a black body, no horns, and only one leg. The group of monsters in front of him had human bodies and deer heads, which was completely different from the ancient records. I asked the evil sacrificial spirit about my doubts. According to him, the Kuei ox was an ancient beast that had lived in this barren land for several thousand years. Many of them had cultivated into human forms. Not only that, the strength of the Kuei ox behind the cultivator is about the late stage of glory of feng shui master or above. After listening to him, I finally understood why he had tried to stop me several times. If I had rushed over just now, I might have ended up like Fatty. Rather than that, I was more curious as to why the sacrificial evil spirits had become so meticulous. I turned to look at him. He seemed to have read my mind. He didn't dare to look at me. He lowered his voice and told me the reason. When the Kuei ox entered the water, there would be wind and rain. Its light was like the sun and the moon, and its voice was like thunder. In the Great War that year, the Yellow Emperor had won because he had used the Kuei ox's fur to make a big drum. He had used the Kuei ox's leg bone to beat the drum. The deafening sound could be heard for 100 miles, which made Chiyo's army fall into chaos. Chiyo was captured and killed. After listening to him, I understood that it wasn't because he had become meticulous. He had experienced the Kuei ox's power. Moreover, we didn't have the strength to trust a chicken. We weren't its equal opponent. That was why he didn't take action. However, it wasn't the time to sit and wait for death. The fatty was still in their hands. We had to think of a way to save him. I patted the evil, sacrificial spirit's shoulder. "Do you have a solution?" However, after pondering for a long time, he couldn't say anything. Eventually, he turned to look at me. I sat down and gazed in the direction of the Kuei cow. After several minutes, I had rejected many methods in my head. When the Kuei ox was about to leave, I made up my mind. I called the evil sacrificial spirit to follow me. According to my thoughts, we couldn't reveal ourselves rashly. We could only follow behind them and see where they would hide the fatty. When they relaxed their guard, we would save him. As for killing the Kuei ox, we would think about it later. Although we were following them, for safety reasons, we had to stay far away from the Kuei ox. Just like that, we walked for a long time until we crossed a mountain. Then we stopped. In front of us was a village built with straw. The Kuei ox carried the fatty and stood at the entrance of the village. They didn't move, as if they were waiting for something. After a while, a strong man walked out of the village. He opened and closed his mouth as if he was talking to the Kuei ox at the entrance of the village. Then, the Kuei ox nodded and carried the fatty into the village. The sturdy man glanced at us. He paused for a moment before entering the village. I heaved a sigh of relief. When a man looked at us, my heart had jumped to my throat. According to what the evil sacrificial spirit had said, the Kuei ox had completely transformed into a human. His power should be around that of the Seal Heavenly Master. If it was before, I could kill him in one strike. But now it was different. If I met him, I could only wait for my death. At this moment, the evil sacrificial spirit asked me what we should do next. Should we enter the village to save the fatty? I waved my hand. It wasn't wise for us to enter the village. It was possible that we would be discovered before we could find the fatty. I pondered for a while and decided to rest here. When the sky turned dark, we would sneak into the village. Since they didn't harm the fatty, he would be fine for the time being. I just hoped that there was a day and night cycle in Billows Mountain. Otherwise, it would be difficult for us to move. Then I lay down. After walking for a long time, I had used up a lot of energy. My body was exhausted. Not long after, I fell asleep. I didn't know how long I had slept. When I woke up, it was pitch black and there were no stars above my head. If it weren't for the evil sacrificial spirit, I would have thought that I had been captured. I hurried to ask if there was anything strange. After getting the evil sacrificial spirit confirmation, I relaxed. I tidied up my clothes and prepared to enter the village. I stood on the mountainside and looked in the direction of the village. The weeds had blocked my view, so I couldn't see the situation there. But now, I saw a fire flickering in the village. I was startled. If the Kueox tribe had a fire, it meant that they had a civilization. Once they had a civilization, it would be more difficult for us to deal with them. Moreover, the possibility of the fatty being harmed would be higher. After thinking about this, I didn't dare to linger. I took the evil, sacrificial spirit and dashed toward the source of the fire. When we reached the village entrance, we slowed down. While staying vigilant, we walked toward the village. Fortunately, there was no light at night. It was a good cover for us. So we went on till we got to the fire and found a haystack for shelter. I craned my neck to look at the fire. I saw dozens of Kuei oxen with human bodies and deer heads sitting neatly on the ground. They surrounded the fire. They didn't make any noise. Instead, they gazed at the muscular man standing next to the fire. It was the same man who had appeared at the entrance of the village. The man was making some noises that I didn't understand. The Kuei oxen around him nodded. Then, the man continued to make noises. He looked like a human, but he was making strange noises that sounded like animals. It was really strange. I lowered my voice and asked the evil sacrificial spirit, "Can you understand what the man is saying?" The spirit shook his head. He was as confused as I was. Pondering for a while, I changed my mind. There were many different races among humans, and they all had different languages. Perhaps this place was isolated, so they didn't communicate with the outside world. After a long time, they had developed their own language that the outside world couldn't understand. I didn't want to linger here because I didn't see the fatty. I guess they had hidden him somewhere. As they were gathering here, I took the evil sacrificial spirit with me to search every house. I was sure we would find the fatty. About an hour later, we found the fat man tied up like a rice dumpling in a dilapidated thatched hut. At this moment, he was still unconscious. I hurried to untie the straw rope on his body and shook him awake. As soon as he woke up, he waved his arms and legs. While struggling, he screamed for mercy. I covered his mouth and nose to stop him from making any noise. When he heard my voice, he opened his eyes and gave me a big hug. Tears rolled down his cheeks as he cried, "Third baby, you're finally here." I was almost eaten by those monsters. Looking at the fatty, I didn't feel good. However, it wasn't the time to reminisce. I asked him to calm down and get ready to leave this place. We took the fatty and headed back the way we had come. Along the way, the fatty asked us how we had found him. I told him what had happened. However, he didn't believe me. "Why?" He said, "When I was carried in, I was still conscious. I clearly felt that the monsters were walking in a very strange way when they carried me into the village. It felt like they were walking through some kind of special magic circle." After listening to the fatty, I furrowed my brows. According to him, there should be some kind of formation in this village. However, the evil sacrificial spirit and I didn't encounter any obstacles along the way. All of a sudden, I remembered the strange expression on the muscular man's face when he turned around. Chapter 750. However, before we could run far, we saw a fire around us. A group of Kuei cows were holding torches, blocking our way. At this moment, we were like turtles in a jar. The fat man had tasted their power before. Seeing this, he panicked. What's going on? I didn't have time to tell him the details. We've fallen into a trap. I'm afraid we won't be able to escape. However, I didn't expect that the Kauai cows were cunning enough to set up a trap for us. We were too careless. Looking at this situation, we couldn't resist. If we surrendered, we might be able to keep our lives. I told them what I was thinking. Then, I held my head and squatted on the ground. After the fat man heard me, he imitated me. However, the evil sacrificial spirit was born with arrogance. He couldn't accept this kind of humiliation. No matter how hard I tried to persuade him, he didn't budge. At this moment, a man walked out of the herd of Kauai cows, heading toward us. It was the one we had seen by the fire. He carefully watched us, his eyes teasing us. He didn't talk. After a while, he asked the Kauai cows behind him to tie us up. At first, the evil sacrificial spirit wanted to resist. If we let him act rashly, not only would he not be able to escape, but he would also bring harm to us. I hurried to stop him and explain to him the severity of the situation. After listening to me, he stopped moving, his face sullen. We were imprisoned in the place where we had rescued the fat man. It was dark here, and we couldn't see the situation since we couldn't use our cultivation techniques. However, I could confirm that besides the three of us, the Kauai cows weren't in this room. Perhaps they knew that we couldn't escape. That was why they didn't worry about leaving us here. In this pitch-black darkness, the evil sacrificial spirit was still as silent as before. However, the fat man next to him kept screaming, asking him to let us go. However, no one responded to him. Eventually, his throat was dry. He stopped and panted. "Do you know how to get out of here as soon as possible?" Of course, I knew that we couldn't just sit here and wait for death, but I couldn't think of any solution at this moment. Our hands and feet were tied up tightly, and we couldn't take out the armor-removing sword from Xiang Lu's bag to cut the ropes. In my opinion, those Kauai cows weren't in a hurry to deal with us. Perhaps they had other uses for us. At this moment, we didn't need to worry about our safety. Let's wait until tomorrow to see what they were planning. I told the two of them what I was thinking. I asked the fatty to calm down and rest for a while to conserve his strength for tomorrow's fight. The fatty didn't respond. After a moment of silence, he fell to the ground and fell into a deep sleep. Sometimes, I really envied Fatty's personality. He could sleep no matter how extreme the situation was. After the fatty fell asleep, I discussed with the evil sacrificial spirit what we would do tomorrow. But no matter what he said, it was still the same. He would rush out and fight them with his life at dawn tomorrow. I couldn't help but shake my head and ignore him. I closed my eyes and tried to imagine what would happen tomorrow. I want to know how I should face it. Unknowingly, I fell asleep. When I woke up in a daze, it was already light. The fatty was still snoring, and the evil sacrificial spirit next to him was still staring at the door. I kicked the fat man to wake him up. I wanted him to come back to his senses. Someone would be coming soon. Indeed, as soon as I finished talking, I heard footsteps outside the door. Then, with a squeak, the half-closed door was pushed open, and 3 Kauai cows with human bodies and deer heads came in. They didn't care about us. They walked toward us and carried us on their shoulders. Then, they walked out of the door. The fatty didn't understand the situation. He struggled on the Kauai cow's shoulder and cursed. The Kauai cow didn't budge. It walked toward the place where we had built the bonfire last night. I was a little nervous after the fatty had made such a fuss. However, I asked him to calm down first. It wasn't going to help if they continued to make trouble. We should see what they wanted to do. After listening to me, the fatty's body slumped and he didn't make a sound. I crouched on the Kauai cow's back and lifted my head to look in the direction they were heading. The bonfire we had built last night was still burning. I was bewildered. Do they want to burn us to death here? I wanted to get rid of the Kauai cow's shoulder. Although I didn't know if I could escape, I didn't want to die like this. However, as soon as I had a plan, the Kauai cow circled around the bonfire and headed in another direction. At this moment, the fatty and I were facing each other. He winked at me as if he was asking me what was going on. I shook my head to show that I didn't know what was going on. The fatty stooped his head, his face dispirited. I didn't pay attention to him and continued to look in front of us. Not far from us, dozens of Kauai stakes lined up and stood under a high platform. In front of them was a pile of firewood. The man who had taken the lead last night was dressed neatly. His upper body was painted with a strange pattern. He was holding a torch and looking at us from a distance. This formation was similar to some kind of sacrificial ritual. The fatty could see the obvious situation. While struggling, he asked me to think of a solution. After he shouted at me, I became more anxious. My head was blank, and I couldn't think of anything. At this moment, the evil sacrificial spirit, who hadn't spoken yet, reminded me, "Pay attention to the thing on the high platform." After listening to him, I turned to look. I saw a big yellow bell hovering above the platform. As the Kauai cow walked faster, I could see its appearance more clearly. The big bell was engraved with the sun, moon, and stars. Wisps of fire twirled around the bell. I was a little surprised. I turned to look at the sacrificial evil spirit to get confirmation from his mouth. He nodded at me. "Yes, it is." After listening to him, my gloomy face was swept away. I couldn't hide my excitement. The evil sacrificial spirit should find a chance to escape. We should get the Eastern Emperor bell first. The evil sacrificial spirit nodded and didn't say anything else. Shortly after, we were carried to the pile of firewood. The Kauai cow put us down. It didn't rush to throw us into the pile of firewood. It turned to the man and nodded at him. Then it left. The man handed the torch in his hand to the Kauai cow next to him. Then, he received a bowl of dark green liquid. It looked like the dark green seawater we had seen when a monster had appeared outside the island. The man divided the water into 3 portions and sprinkled them on our bodies. Then, he threw the bowl to the ground. The bowl was broken. Seeing this, I suddenly had an idea. I pretended to be frightened and fell to the ground. At this moment, my body was on top of the broken pieces of the pottery. I quickly picked up the small pieces and held them in my hand. Everything happened so fast that the man didn't notice my strange action. He asked his men to carry us to the pile of firewood. Then, he threw the torch at the pile of firewood. He led the Kauai cows behind him and knelt down in the direction of the high platform, shouting loudly. The fat man was panic-stricken. Seeing that I didn't move, his cursing turned into crying. I kicked the fat man and moved toward him. At first, he didn't move. When I handed him the pottery shard, he looked overjoyed. I told the fat man, "At this moment, we can only remove the straw ropes on our hands. We can't make any big movements to avoid being discovered." Then, I moved toward the sacrificial evil spirit and gave him a piece of pottery. Then, I told him what I had told the fatty, word for word. After listening to me, the fat man didn't show any expression. He just nodded. Around 3 minutes later, we had cut the straw ropes on our hands. At this moment, the fire on the pile of firewood was about to reach us. I hurried to ask the others to untie the straw ropes on our legs. The Kauai cows didn't expect that we could get rid of them. They were bewildered and didn't move. Seizing the chance, we jumped off the pile of firewood and ran toward the high platform. The fat man didn't understand. He hesitated for a while, but decided to follow us. When the man saw us running toward the high platform, he reacted first. He commanded the Kauai cows behind him to run toward us. Fortunately, the fat man had sharp eyes and quick hands. When the man was about to reach him, he picked up a piece of wood from the fire and tossed it to the ground. He temporarily stopped the Kauai cows from moving forward, which gave me and the evil sacrificial spirit enough time. Fortunately, we weren't far for the Eastern Emperor bell. Moreover, we were running as fast as we could. We were almost there. The man's eyes were red. He roared and fell to the ground. Then, he turned into a Kauai cow. I was surprised, but I didn't think much. I reached my hand to push the Eastern Emperor bell. However, as I pushed, the Eastern Emperor bell fell to the high platform. It used to be as big as 2 people holding hands, but now it looked like a small bell. Not only that, but the mysterious light around it had also disappeared. Before I could react, the sky suddenly darkened. Instinctively, I lifted my head and saw the constellations of the 9 palaces in the sky. He originally thought that the 9 palaces displacement formation had been triggered again, but he never thought that the constellations would flash and scatter in all directions in the blink of an eye. You're tuning into the Warrior Lore YouTube channel. Don't forget to subscribe and join us on this journey to catch the most captivating stories.